It's Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic over all.
As the team stumbled from one drearily woeful season to another, the frustration of the support turned increasingly to anger. The years of mismanagement had left many fans at breaking point, and with the very future of the club at stake, the decision was made to take on the board and end generations of Kelly White rule. It was not an easy decision for these supporters to make. They were only too aware of the club's traditions and the fact that the Whites and the Kellys had links dating back to the very first Celtic side. These two families had played a significant part in establishing Celtic as a truly great name in football. But there was little point in having a proud history if you had no future. Save Ourselves were the first supporters group to attempt to directly take on the board. They were followed by the Independent Celtic Supporters Association. But it wasn't until the later emergence in 1993 of Celts for Change that fan power really began to change the course of Celtic history. Celts for Change employed a policy of direct action to highlight the club's plight. Their numbers quickly swelled, and demonstrations included a picket outside Celtic's own bankers, the Bank of Scotland. This grassroots campaign for change was supported by rallies, leafleting and a thriving fanzine scene, led by the admirable work of Not The View and latterly Once a Tim. The message was simple but powerful. Back the team, sack the board.
It's Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic over all.
He went on to sign players like Tom Boyd and Tony Mowbray and guys like that as well, and you just thought that this Celtic team isn't too shabby. And even when you look back at some of the results we had that year, you know, this was a team that was going to go places. And then you had the disasters in Europe, and all of a sudden the doubts started to creep in. As you say, Examic's new channel. I remember watching that game on a foreign satellite channel one night that wasn't even in English. You know, and here was a Swiss team absolutely cuffing us, and every time they went up the pitch you were like, oh God almighty, no, you know.
It was just a disaster, you know. And Tom Boyd, I think pound for pound he's probably the best signing Celtic ever made. I mean, he was a great player in his own right, but it was because we got rid of Cascarino as part of the deal. But, I said that I've met Tom a few times. He's a lovely fella and does quite a lot of work for the Kano Foundation. He's a lovely guy, and I said that to him once. He was laughing, but no, he became a stalwart of Celtic Park. What a fullback he was, absolutely brilliant.
And again that year we met Rangers in the Scottish Cup, and it was another chance for us to put this Parker down in the sand and show that we were back. And that was the night, if you remember, at Hampden, where it was lashing out of the heavens, and the Celtic fans were really up for it that night. And then after about 5 minutes, Robertson gets sent off for Rangers, and we just thought, oh, you dancer.
Aye, I was at the game in the Celtic end, uncovered terracing, and that mob's obviously got the big cover over theirs. Me and my two young brothers, I was off work for about a week after it. I probably get hypothermia or something. It was unbelievable. And when Robertson got sent off, we were celebrating as if we'd won the game. But then I think it was McCoy scored. That was like a skidder along the ground, and gutted, absolutely sick, walking out there drenched.
What I remember of that game is I never got a ticket. For whatever reason, I can't remember, I never got a ticket. But I watched it in a pub with quite a few Rangers fans, and I remember I ended up getting a fist fight that night with one of my mates. One of my good mates, who's still a good mate now, but it was just one of them where the two of us were drunk, you were only young, and we started lumping each other outside the pub at the end of the night. But
did you win?
That's what I would call it a draw.
Oh, right.
So that's the main thing I can remember for that game. Like,
at least you weren't wet.
I remember that night. I was listening to Radio Scotland, and it was one of those real bad nights where the reception kept coming in and out. And me and my daddy were sitting listening to the game in the kitchen, and the reception was so bad. My dad then gave up. He says, I can't listen to that any longer, you know. And he went into the living room or whatever. And I was sitting there on my own with this really, really awful reception blowing in and out and in and out. You know, half a commentary in the match, half, you know, country music and all this here kind of stuff. And when Rangers scored, I actually thought we had scored. and I jumped up and I was yelling at the top of my voice, yes, we've scored. A run into my dad. I said, 1-0. He says, who scored? And I says, I don't know. And the two of us ran back into the kitchen and found out McCoist had scored. Double whammy.
A sickener, so it was an absolute sickener. And getting beat with them at the best of times, but then with the weather, and then obviously if they ever beat you in a cup final at Hampden or a semi-final or whatever, when you're walking out you can still hear them singing. You know, you get back to your bus and you could hear them singing, obviously with that roof, because we didn't have a roof, so when we were singing the sort of sound just sort of drifted away, but with them it was a killer. Gutted.
And that ended up a season, the third season in a row without a trophy. And we still believed, didn't we? We still believed going into the 92-93 season we've still got a chance.
I think then it was starting to, the realisation was kicking in, Chris, for me.
Well, I think the team was okay. You know, again, you know, we've rolled out these names over and over again, like, you know, Mowbray and Boyd, you know, Paul McStay, you know, John Collins, you know, even the likes of Jerry Craney up front for that season. You know, Charlie was back. I just thought that we weren't a bad team on paper. Tommy Coyne.
They actually weren't too bad, you know. It was just because the other mob were really good. I think that season we finished third behind them and Aberdeen, 13 points behind them at the end of the season. But it was, you needed something, and we just weren't good enough. You know, they were excellent at the time, to be fair, and we just weren't good enough. And
I'll cut that bit out so I will, Jason.
But it's just the lapses as well. You know, you were playing anybody in the cup and you knew you could go out, and I'm sure that year I think we lost 2-0 to Falkirk at Brockville in the Scottish Cup. I think Aberdeen beat us in the League Cup, and it was heartbreaking. See, when you're walking out a game losing 2-0 in the Scottish Cup to Falkirk, you're just saying, what's going on here? You know, and then you just knew they weren't up for the job, or there was something. I think the players were probably affected by the sort of boardroom struggles and things like that. I think there definitely was an element of that creeping on to affect the players' performances in the park.
I think for me that was the season, when you mentioned the Aberdeen Cup final at the start being a watershed moment, I think this was the season for me where it started to really hit home that this was a team that was going nowhere fast and going backward in a sort of rapid fashion. And I think it was all the stuff that was going on in the boardroom and off the park as like an 18-year-old at that time. So when I really did start to realise it, and it's going to need big changes. The team was going downhill. I mean, you're talking about bringing like Nicholas back, but I mean, he was past it by then. I think that was the season we brought Makuveni back as well, and just the team was going slowly for worse to worse all the time.
No, the realisation had kicked in there that we were toiling big time.
Were invited over by the Irish Celtic Supporters Club to the Imperial Hotel in Dundalk. Must have been round about January 1993, and there was 51 supporters clubs present. They were represented at that meeting, and it was a fantastic meeting. It was a really rousing reception we got the whole Irish crowd on side. They believed in what we were doing, and out of the 52 clubs that were there, 51 delegates voted for backing Celts for Change, and the other delegate had to go back to his club to just ratify it, and he got in touch later on to say that we had got the full backing from the Irish Celtic Supporters Clubs, which was 52 clubs backing Celts for Change. So that was a fantastic boost to the boys, and that get great publicity back home, which really helped the campaign. So the Irish lads really played their part there.
That must have been a real sort of shot in the arm for you all too, because the relationship you had with the associations at the beginning was slow, to say the least, Matt. Is that fair?
Well, we had no backing from the Celtic Supporters Association in Scotland. We had no backing from the affiliation of registered Celtic Supporters Clubs. So to get the Irish clubs, to give us 52 out of 52, I mean, it was just fantastic. I mean, the lads were just so taken aback. Here we had been campaigning in Scotland, 90% of the time and 5-10% of the time in Ireland, and the Irish lads and girls gave us their backing, unanimously. So yeah, it was fantastic. It was a great list result, and you think January, it was coming up to maybe 4 or 5 months of the campaign. Sometimes you would wilt here and there, and you get a bit of strength here and there. But this was a real shake in the arm. It was fantastic, and it was one of the major things that got the campaign through.
Do you think that was probably down to the fact of the coverage that Celtic get in Ireland compared to probably Scotland? You get a lot of the Irish boys going over, and they're the guys that read all the fanzines the whole way home and scrape around for anything they can get on the club, whereas you get a more sort of blanket approach in Scotland.
No, I think there was a nature of the Irish fans. I think they were more rebellious. Now that's not to say they were more rebellious than the Scottish fans. They weren't. Everybody was as rebellious goes. But I think I think there was politics involved in the association, Celtic Supporters Association. I think there was politics involved from individuals within the affiliation of registered Celtic sports clubs. But there wasn't any politics involved in the running of the Irish club. So I think that's how we got their backing. It was more straightforward. But for the clubs back home in the Celtic Supporters Association, the individual clubs, the Kirkshaw Kangaroos from out in Coatbridge, they were canvassing the leadership of the Celtic Supporters Association to back Celts for change. And the leadership at that time, it's different now, but the leadership at that time were well in with the old board, which is quite a shame actually. You think about what was at stake. Celtic Football Club was at stake, and several individuals who were on the committee of the Celtic Supporters Association in Scotland were in with the old board, and they were quite cosy with them. So that's probably why we didn't get the backing there, and there was no politics involved in Ireland, and that's why we get the backing there. Yet
again, Matt, it shows you the whole challenge that Celts for Change faced. Not only with the board themselves, but the established supporters clubs too. And that in itself is a hard thing to overturn as well.
Well, you're right. You're absolutely right there, and that's one of the things that deflated us quite a bit. The fact that we knew there was individual clubs within the Celtic Supporters Association and the affiliation of registered Celtic sports clubs, the two main groups. We knew there was individual clubs who wanted to back us, but we knew that the leadership were well in with the old board. Mm-hmm. That was quite painful, to be honest with you, because we're thinking, well, Celtic's at stake here. This is a club. It's not about 4 or 5 people's position when they walk in and they get cups of tea and custard creams and they get nice seats in the stand. It's not about your individual wants and needs. It's about the overall welfare of what Celtic are. And, that made us quite angry at times, and we knew what was going on, and, I just think we had wonderful spirit in the group, and it was a case of never, never, never give in, and that's the attitude we took, and we eventually got there.
But these were still the days when Hugh Keevins was appearing, presenting Celtic videos.
If you these days they've got a story on a plate and they're running away from it. The comparison's stark.
They're probably doing their jobs at a time which we're journalists, and you do look into things and don't be blink on it or swayed by opinion from your news desk or whatever. So these guys, fair enough, they went for it, and good, it gave us information as well that we wouldn't have probably got. But as I say, what a difference nowadays. Where did all that journalistic skill go?
What do you mean they give you information?
Information out about Canberra wasn't going to happen. Wasn't us that found that. That came out the papers, Scottish media.
All right, okay. I thought you meant actually had the contact.
Trash the story about Celtic moving to Canberra. No. God, no, not at all. Not at all.
Well, actually, to be honest, and I met Keevins once or twice. He gave us an interview. He did an interview for the magazine way back in the early days. We can still find it in one of the very early ones. This is, I think, the problem in Scotland. Keevins was basically a football reporter. That was his bread and butter, and he'd rather have been writing the stories about who Rangers were going to sign and all, and in a blind eye to what's been going on across the way in recent years.
So even with the disaster that was pending about Cambuslang, on the pitch that year, Celtic won nothing. Rangers win a treble, and it was doom and gloom again. Liam Brady comes in for season 93-94 and fires all his backroom staff. Bobby Lennox gets moved, Benny Rooney gets moved, Mick Martin went off to do something else, and in came Tom McCallum and Frank Connor and Joe Jordan. So all of a sudden things were looking up again. We're going to go again, right?
And I mean, I'm not too many people would have argued with looks of appointing Frank Connor, even Joe Jordan. Tom McAdam, don't know about, but those two at least had a bit of a track record in management.
So when you look at this from hindsight, from 2013, looking back at it now, when you piece together the history of the club at this stage and you hit the highlights, I mean, some of it actually, in hindsight, looks like it was making sense.
Yeah, do you want to tell me?
I didn't see any.
Tell me what bits.
Well, you remember at the time we criticised everything.
Then a panic sets in again, and then then they start it up and start again time again, and it's too much of that in the space of 3 years or 4 years, and I don't think any club can thrive under that kind of atmosphere. With the whole Canvas Lang thing, the Jeff and all thing, and all the rest of it, I think they'd lost the fans anyway by then. It's going to take something much more than just been shuffling the deck chairs about on the Titanic to appease the fans by then.
But the good things we had were like the St Patrick's Day Massacre, but it didn't lead to anything. It was just a one-off game, and then we don't go on and win it. We're out of the cup.
So with all this going on off the field, how did you see the fanzine develop? You know, whenever you were seeing the regular Joe supporters starting to disbelieve everything that was in the Celtic View at the time, you know, people were banning the fanzine. This was really the start of the fans movement, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, thankfully, it led on. What was good about it was it led on to other things, not necessarily we was at the forefront or not, the View taking the lead in that. There was other people came along and take it on from there. So I suppose, you know, if you went a place for the fanzine, it kind of convinced people that there was a lot of folk same way, but there was thank goodness there was other people came along and did other things that started up other more practical things than just reading about it in a magazine.
See, one of the things as well about the red card issue, for example, it got a lot of people thinking that after the match, for weeks after it, people were talking about it, how successful it was, how good it looked, and I think about it a lot in people's mind, going, you can do something. Things were just starting to change, and even technology and your information. So people you didn't have to just rely on a radio show or the newspapers. People were starting to find out things for themselves, and it put a lot of people in touch with other people and said, right, let's do this, let's do that. There's a whole change in the era there in the 90s.
How did you boys react to the Celts for Change and stuff whenever it started to come on board? Was the fanzine a big backer of it at the time? Or, I mean, did you know the Brenton Sweeneys and the Matt McGlones and all this kind of thing?
It was Wee Wally for Clydebank and Save Ourselves first started that. Yeah. This Wee Wally for Clydebank started Save Ourselves, and put a lot of effort into it. We were there, met them, and then it kind of didn't take off. But shortly, not long after that, Celtic Change came along with a lot of guys who got involved with Save Ourselves, and that really hit the streets running.
And that was Willie Wilson who was running.
Yeah, Willie,
Celts, right?
But he was just doing that himself. It was amazing what he was trying to do, and he was just doing it himself. He got in touch with us, and then going to him and all that, and thinking, this guy's just doing it off his own back. But that was the follow-on was obviously Celtic for Change, which was more organised, got everything going. But again, we were at meetings at the start of that as well, and it was just a small group. But that quickly, because the fans were bought into it big time, they knew something had to change.
Alright, well I have to bring it up. Missed the penalty in the cup final. Does it still haunt you?
No, not at all, mate.
No.
It's never haunted me, Chris.
Uh-huh.
I'm not being horrible or rude. The first couple of months, it was terrible because it did happen, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking, I missed it. It's one kick of the ball, the keeper saved it.
It's actually a good save, Anton.
I've never seen it, Chris. I still haven't seen it on TV. But everyone I speak to says, oh, it's a great save, Rogue. Well, that doesn't really help, does it?
I know.
But it happens, you know, and it's going to happen someone eventually. I was unfortunate enough it was me.
Did you? I mean, you were a fullback. I mean, traditionally fullbacks take a lot of penalties too. You know, did you think? Did you practice penalties? Did you think you were going to have to take one, or was it just oh god, this is going on and on and on, and
that was the first penalty I've ever taken.
Is that right?
Ever.
Is it the last penalty you ever took?
I didn't actually, because we went to Millwall, I ended up taking the penalty. I was scored 5 out of 5. That was alright.
But how did you feel walking up? Were you hoping you wouldn't have to take one?
Well, to be fair, I had to take it because there was nobody else to take it.
I know.
Mine was the last kit, wasn't it?
I know. Ah, well.
It was a mere packing. Packing didn't fancy it.
Well, also, you know, Arthur Borage taking a penalty a couple of seasons ago and he plunked it in the back of the net, you know?
I know. It's one of them things, as you know, it happens and that's it. But as you say, it happened to me and I thought, well, it'll go on and on and on. But as you say, a lot of people I speak to now, you know, well, it does happen.
Yeah.
I was going to do it eventually, aren't I?
Anton, what about the old story doing the rounds after you missed the penalty and stuff, somebody up and threw stones at your mummy's windows and all that kind of stuff? Is that true or is that not true?
That's all bollocks. Excuse my language, Chris. That's all rubbish, mate.
Never happened.
That's all rubbish.
Uh-huh.
It's complete and utter rubbish, you know.
That's why I asked you, because you know you hear these things and you think, well, it sounds a wee bit ridiculous.
Yeah, no. They wouldn't have done it, mate. They would have known better, if you understand. I'm not being horrible, but nobody would have done that. Mm-hmm. And that would have been, if I'd have found out who done it, I'm not being horrible, I would have, if you understand. Because it was me, not my family, it was me. It's my situation, not theirs.
Well, that's West Belfast, where people sort their own problems out, don't they?
Exactly, mate, exactly. And that's the way it is, and it'll always be like that.
Most of the football greats have passed through Parkhead skates for to play football the Glasgow Celtic way.
But still, that was the year, Jason, you were talking about where we knocked Cologne out of the UEFA Cup and then played Borussia Dortmund after that. I mean, these were top division teams in the Bundesliga. And, I mean, Celtic Cologne game was cracking, so it was.
Well, that was my first ever European trip. I went to Craig Newt Tommy Gemmell Celtic Supporters Club. We went to Cologne. We stayed in Dusseldorf, and the stories we could tell for there. We went in the bus, and at Cologne before the game, the amount of Celtic fans, I think there must have been in between about 8,000 and 10,000 Celtic supporters. 10,000. We had one end behind the goals and we had 2 stands. It was in the old Cologne Stadium. But I mind at the end of the game, after we lost 2-0, people were shouting where the team bus was coming out. I walked round past that bit and people were shouting in the gates, "He's a effing rubbish" and stuff like that. And then what a night at Celtic Park when we brought them back, because the German teams, they always bring massive amount of supporters. So Cologne had a right good support over with them, and we didn't see that coming. But 3-0, what a night at Celtic Park. That's one of my favourite European nights at Celtic Park. We beat them 3-0. I know it wasn't in the European Cup, but it was still great, you know. And back then I didn't really bother. I think, see, if you were in the UEFA Cup or if you were in the Cup Winners' Cup or the European Cup, it didn't really make a difference to me. It was just you were in Europe, you know. It was you had these foreign teams coming with loads of sponsors and their strips and these luminous strips and things like that, and all these like fast wingers, and it was at night games at Celtic Park, and it was just dead romantic to me. I just loved it. I just loved that full scene with the European sort of culture and the European team coming, these fans singing crazy songs, and I loved it. And then we beat them 3-0. The place erupted. That was great. And then that Borussia Dortmund team that beat us, I think they beat us in away goals or whatever, I think, in the following round. But what a team they had. Stefan Chapuisat, I think they had, and they're an amazing team. Muller, but absolute top drawer they were. You're right, Chris. We still had some, and we used to beat Rangers every now and then as well, you know. We would always chip in with some victories against them, even though we were we weren't challenging at the business end of the table. But we had some good times as well, but for the vast majority it was quite turgid.
It's funny when you talk about these years and you can sum up some of the seasons in about 4 words.
Aye.
And, when you talk about the people's jersey and you talk about some of the signings that we made, Cascarino and all that there kind of stuff, and then you have Campbell's Lang. You could just do every season and throw out 4 words and everybody would go, I remember that season. Because that was the year, of course, that the Campbell's Lang idea as well started to get brandished about, and that's when it started, naively I think, on my part, where you start to think, we are going to move from Celtic Park here. There's the drawings, there's the model, there's Kevin Kelly standing in a field with his arms open.
That's I didn't know what to believe then. I just didn't know what to believe. It was a nightmare waking up and reading the paper, because you didn't know what next was going to be down crying the club. And back then I did buy the Daily Record every day, and I did believe stuff that was wrote in it, because I'd no other way of getting news. And it was terrible, and you just didn't know what was going to happen. Something that you hold as dear to your heart as your family. Like Celtic's a massive part of my life, and it's maybe going to get ripped away and sent to Campbell's Lang. You're like, what's going on here?
See if you remember right, and I urge any Celtic fan listening to this who hasn't done so to go to the Celtic wiki and just look up the Campbell's Lang stuff. Because it has the front page of the Celtic View there with Kevin Kelly standing with his arms out, Paradise Found, and you can read all the stuff. But I can remember getting that Celtic View the day it came out, and I can remember reading this and thinking, this is happening. This is definitely happening, because it was in so much detail. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't just like, we're planning on doing this. They had drawings, they had all these plans, they had architects had done all this stuff, and you suddenly thought, this is what happened. A 52,000 seater stadium, retail village, museum, cinema, temple and bowling. And I completely bought into all that. Not saying that I'm saying I bought into it in a happy way, let's do this, but I completely bought into this. This is definitely what's happened.
It was only the fact that it was going to happen to Celtic put that little bit of doubt in your mind. Because on paper it did look smashing like.
On one hand we were building a £100 million stadium, on the other hand we were signing Andy Payton and Wayne Biggins, because that really was the time when we started signing players that we'd never heard of.
Carol Muggleton.
Right. That was saying.
It's funny how you look back at those days and you think how your mindset changed, because you say about buying the Daily Record every day. Yes, we did buy the Daily Record every single day to read about this. And I remember I was working at the time, and I was driving to work every day with my dad, and I would go into the paper shop every day. I bought the Daily Record, he bought the Irish News, and even the Irish News, a guy called Kevin McKenna, I think his name was, had a little column in it, and he was writing about what was going on. And I remember my dad getting really upset, because he was going, that's terrible, writing all that about the board and all the rest of it. It'll be all right. And I'm sitting beside him going, it's not going to be all right. Because he was sort of one of these traditional Celtic supporters, never sort of questioned anything that went on, because that's the way the club was. And I remember my mindset changing at that stage and thinking, this club is in huge trouble.
Aye, definitely. Because you would hear some board members or Cassidy or whoever coming out and talking, and it was just drivel that they were saying, Michael Kelly and things like that, and you couldn't trust a word that they were saying. I mean, they were only trying to protect their interests, and if I was in their position I might have done the same. I don't know, because I don't think they were inherently evil people, but I just think they were pretty incompetent, and I think they were well out of their depth, because football as a sport was changing, and the amount of money floating around football nowadays, in their days it was sort of starting to, players were starting to get bigger wages, commanding, football was becoming trendy, and it was becoming a nice, it was like a status symbol, your season ticket and things like that, whereas before it was a very much working class sport, cheap and affordable, but it was changing, and you had to move with the times if you were going to sort of flourish in that market, and we certainly weren't moving with the times.
So your brief venture onto the board ended in October 1990. Joined in May, ended in October.
Yeah.
Why did it all end? And what did you feel like when it ended?
I felt stupid. I felt that I had got in here, encouraged by the chairman and by Jimmy Farrell and Tom Grant, to get stuck in and start changing Celtic Football Club. And when it came to the bit, they wouldn't support me. They were scared they were flung off the board too. They were told if they supported me, they were next. And I felt stupid. I put my trust out in these people.
So do you think that was down to your relationship with the fans? Do you think it was down to, you know, your suggestion about moving the stadium to Royston?
That was not being raised forcibly at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was down to my attacking them. I was attacking them constantly as not doing what I thought and believed was best for Celtic.
Mm-hmm.
They did not want anyone interfering with their empire.
And you see how the story plays out, and it's easy to look back here, 20-odd years later, to how the story played out. Was there no indication from those guys at the time that change was afoot and they could have taken the club on to the next level? I mean,
no.
We see the Canvas Lang plans and, the Jack McGinn in the middle of the field and all this here kind of stuff, but did they really believe they could do it?
I think they believed anything that suited them to believe. But deep down, they had to know there were serious problems in anything, because the simple problem with Celtic is it was undercapitalised. It needed a lot of money. And they were not prepared to pay the price of getting that money, which was losing control. For me, the Celtic at the time was that they would continue running and controlling Celtic, not what was best for Celtic.
And then
therefore, I was in a completely different wavelength and a different planet from them. Theirs was self-preservation, and mine was moving forward.
And at that time, we hear of Fergus getting involved, and this name, this Canadian guy who nobody knew, Fergus McCann. Where did Fergus McCann come from? Who lifted the phone and said, I know this guy called Fergus McCann, how do we get him involved?
A friend of mine, it's unfair to name him, who ran a PR agency in Glasgow, phoned me and said this guy had tried to do something before, came and offered about 2 or 3 years earlier money, and Jack McGinn and short shifted him. Do you want to talk to him? I said, sure. I welcome anyone and everyone. Anyone who is prepared to come along and put the capital into Celtic, who's the right man and has Celtic's best interests at heart, I'll speak to anyone. Spoke to him, we had a good chat. I went out to meet him in the winter months. He moved to Phoenix in Arizona, Phoenix from Montreal, and I flew to Phoenix. I was going out I have a beach house in California. I flew out to meet him on my way to California, and I realised he was a difficult guy, but he wanted to do so much, and that developed a relationship.
And when you first met him, did you know from then, or did you get a good enough feeling from them that this may be someone that could take the club on? I mean,
I had no doubt he could do it, because he was totally driven, totally focused, totally ruthless, cared about no one but himself. I kept saying to me, I got a plan, got to stick to the plan. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, and he would do it. Now, he wouldn't deny it. Fergus was all about making money for himself and saving Celtic at the same time and taking Celtic forward. So he never made any bones about that, and he achieved both.
But still, there was also talk at the time about the Wisefield investment as well.
Yes, I encouraged them all in, and he said to me one day, do I have to take all these people on? I said, yes, you do. Remember, he said, does everyone want to be a director of Celtic? I said, yes, they do. I said, but because of that, take all these people on, exclude me. You don't need me there. Take all these people on who will put money into the club, serious money, and who want to see it improved.
What was your role at that stage? Were you trying to get them both to invest? Was there only going to be one winner, or?
I wanted everyone to invest.
So what happened?
Fergus had this proposal he came up with, which allowed Gerald Wisefield did subsequently invest, put money in. that everyone could come on board. But Fergus made sure at that point, well, I said to him at the time, just make sure you're in control. Because if there's not one person able to control Celtic, we'll go back to where we were. This had to be driven. Fergus wasn't going to let anyone near the place unless he had control. He was putting most of the money in and he wanted control.
And that was something that you were happy with at the time, of course?
It was necessary. Whether I was happy or not, the plan set out a method of redeveloping Celtic Park, reconstituting Celtic, bringing the fans in totally and completely, which hasn't gone quite the way I would have wanted it, but it started it the right way, and there was nothing else on the horizon. It was the only show in town that achieved those different objectives.
And then coming up to the famous day when the takeover actually happened, Brian, what were the events leading up to it? What were the final straws that broke the camel's back?
Well, I was, that was a Wednesday night. It was a double-header of European football. The second game on very late was Arsenal, I forget. Events faded away after this, at about 11:45. The phone went home, my wife said to me, it's Kevin Kelly on the phone, and I laughed. The Kellys hadn't spoken to me in 3 or 4 years. And I took the call and I said, hello, wondering who it was. He said, hello, Brian, it's Kevin. I said, Kevin, to what do I owe this honour? He said, could we meet tomorrow morning? I said, what's up? And now, sorry, he said, have you been watching the football? Was that a great cold? Did you watch that? He talked for about 5 minutes about the football, and then he said, can we meet tomorrow morning? I said, what's the problem? If we don't have £1 million in the bank by 5 o'clock tomorrow night, the club will be put into receivership. And we'd spent all this time gibberish. He'd waited all night instead of phoning me at 6 o'clock. We should have met. They left the bank at 6. We should have met at 7 o'clock that night. And to hell with the football. And I said, we meet at 8 o'clock. And give me all the facts. Went to the bank at 11 o'clock. They said they'd already appointed receivers. I said, well, look, who were moving in that afternoon, 5 o'clock, because they knew there was no way they were coming up with money. I said, by the time I get you the money, it'll be tomorrow. They said, that's fine. 5 o'clock tomorrow, just get your bank to confirm it's coming and we'll wait. Mm-hmm. The Bank of Scotland were wonderful. And they knew that they said to me, we believe you represent the Celtic community here and we'd like to move forward with the Celtic community. That's where Fergus, one of the areas he got it wrong. But anyway, be that as it may. So we then had a meeting the next morning when I went to the bank. They were busy writing up their contracts of employment, 10-year contracts of employment, which I can assure you were subsequently torn up. And that started the ball rolling. We then had to get £1 million in the next day. We then had to move forward with the EGM and various things, and the takeout of the Kellys and Whites. We had to buy them out in order to protect the company, because £1 million had gone in with no security.
Mm-hmm. And the famous scene of yourself on the steps of Celtic Park with Fergus. When you look back at that now, what goes through your mind about the time? Did it go past in a whirlwind, or do you still look back very fondly? Do you remember every minute of it?
I remember lots of it, but it was a day where one of the reasons for the delay was there was only one typewriter at Celtic Park, and by the time they brought the typists in from the legal firm, it took them quite a long time to type up all the agreements. So it went on and on and on forever till about midnight at night. And I always remember thinking, this is just preposterous. And the events had overtaken themselves with the fans outside, and that magnificent group of people that the Celtic support owe so much to, called Celts for Change, Mark McGlone and his team. The Celtic support owe them so much. That I was indoors, they were out in rain and doing all sorts of things. I was always at least sheltered. They were the foot soldiers of immense courage and resilience, and I could never praise them enough for what they did for their fellow Celtic supporters and Celtic Football Club. And they all were outside, so events were overtaking themselves. I said at one point, look, we can reconvene and do this tomorrow. But we had about 60, 70 press there, some European press and TV stations, all within Celtic Park, thousands gathering outside. We had to carry on to get it done.
And once it was all signed, was there a relief lifted off you, or were you excited about the work that was coming up, or where were you at that stage? Because yes, okay, the club had been saved at the 11th hour, but there was still so much to be done.
Well, that's absolutely right, Chris. I was terrified. I'd been in business and I've taken massive gambles and land deals and also nothing like the terror I felt that night, that now it all had to be done, and all credit. Fergus took over the next day and it was his ball, only he was playing with it, and he literally stuck in. He said to me, I'm going to be burning the midnight oil at this place for I don't know how long. It was terror, and even he was doing the majority of the work. It was terror that the hope I had given to the Celtic fans and the things I'd said, and not promises, but the aspirations I told them that we all shared, I wanted and was worried to see that they were materialised.
And even before the takeover, I think the fans knew what direction the McCann Consortium was going to move in. That had been released. People knew what the ideas and stuff were to move the club forward. As that started to become a reality, did your relationship with Fergus change at that stage, Brian?
Yes, because, well, it was a very personal thing between us that he lied to me about. And I will repeat that. He lied to me about it. And I didn't like that. It frightened me. And I was not comfortable going on. And I was very uncomfortable with what was happening with one or two of the other investors and how they were being dealt with. And quite clearly, he had said that this was his ball now and he was going to play with it. He'd put most of the money in. He would run the show. And I was there concerned that I knew that by staying there, he and I would be battling all the time, because I was always saying to him, the Celtic fans, the Celtic fans, the Celtic fans. And he would talk about the Celtic customers, the Celtic customers, the Celtic customers. And I knew we just couldn't go on. And I thought quickly but deeply about it, realised that there was no way of going on here, that if this went on between us, and I mean this very honestly, I could damage the club if within a few weeks, in the midst of all the plans, I suddenly walked out. That I thought, if I do it now and say that I've had years of this, it's Fergus's challenge now, it's up to him to take it forward, it was not damaging at all compared to something going on for 6 months and then walking out once the club had floated in the stock exchange, which was never our agreement, that the Celtic fans could be seriously damaged, and I couldn't do it. And I said this to him. He will not go into the matter. He might choose to say or do something. I said, I cannot do that. For you can escape to the anonymity of Canada, but I have to live here. And I wouldn't do what he wanted done. Now, everything's gone on and the club's strong, and if the end justifies the means, that's fine. But for me, it doesn't.
And looking back today, Brian, I'm sensing from what you're telling me and from the tone that you're using, you're still disappointed to this day. Is that a fair statement?
Sometimes I'm disappointed, Chris, but then other times rationale takes over and say, well, if I stayed on, it would have been a very public blowout. And see all the stuff that's going on at Rangers, in and out of chairmanships, in and out of boards, in and out of this. That's what would have happened. And you might choose to disbelieve this, and people could say, oh, it's easy to say that's rubbish. But I did recognise all that at that time. And I could not put Celtic through that, or myself or my family through anymore, because we had lives of hell from the press, checking everything, going into everything. You couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't go on holiday, couldn't take a day off, they felt they owned you, you were at their beck and call constantly, all very nice and good people, but you were publicly owned. And I couldn't put anyone through any more of that. And to do, it would have ended up in a bigger mess than is at Rangers today, and I couldn't do that to Celtic or myself.
But still, with the club being saved and the way it moved forward, although the club is different today than what it was in 1984 in 1,000 different ways, and we could talk about that all night, you must look back with some satisfaction as to your role in the takeover.
I feel very satisfied because there would have been no takeover without me. And the only thing that saddens me that is airbrushed from the history of the official history of Celtic. I don't exist. That's because I had a very private and very personal blowout with Ferguson, told him what I thought of him. And because of that, Brian Dempsey was never mentioned.
Well, that's why we're doing the fans' history of Celtic now, Brian.
That's sad in some respects, but quietly is gratifying for me, because if I'm true to myself and if I'm not misleading myself, when I went into all this at the time, I always wanted to only do what was best for the Celtic support. And I feel like even walking away, that's what was best. Because it would have to imagine Celtic going through all the stuff that Rangers have had to go through, all the nonsense about personnel on and off, all this stuff. That would have been a disaster in my life.
And I think that's one thing that we all look at as Celtic fans today when we look across the city and we see the limping disaster that it has become.
Yep.
And we think back to those days, we had suffered an awful lot of pain. But the pain was consistently with the same people for 100 years.
Yep.
But what Rangers are going through right now is probably even worse than what we experienced.
Yep.
Because there's no direction.
I never publicly said anything against anyone personally at Celtic. And I may have said things privately, but nothing I didn't say to them directly. But publicly, I'd never be drawn into this. Everyone does what they do with the best will in the world, whether it's the Kellys, the Whites, Fergus McCann, Dermot Desmond, whoever it might be. Everyone does what they think is best for them. And that's good enough for me, provided it doesn't damage the Celtic support. And remember that big institution, that icon, that part of your everyday living, where we failed in so many aspects of social life by lack of opportunity, by lack of facilities, whatever it might be, that Celtic represented it, given a clear and even playing field. Whoever we were, we could compete with the best and sometimes win.
Brian Dempsey, that is a fantastic way to end this interview, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and having a wee chat, because this, what we're trying to do is tell the true story of Celtic Football Club based on the history, and the whole point of it is to bring out the good and the bad of what happened.
And while it's a good ending, I made mistakes during that period too. We all make mistakes. But the greatest event of all the Celtic happenings for me, and I say this very, very honestly, is the wonderful relationship, honesty and integrity I received, and the criticism from the Celtic support. Celtic support, without question, is the salt of the earth. God bless them all.
And do you think the fanzine was one of the vehicles that was used by the fans at that stage to actually, promote this revolution?
Oh yeah, because you didn't have much else, as Joe was saying. You didn't have mobile phones even to organise things. So you put a wee thing in the magazine saying there's going to be a meeting or whatever on a certain day. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, find out if they put Celtic Change put a wee note in, not the View, it was going to reach thousands of Celtic fans, absolute thousands. Word of mouth as well was a great thing back in the day.
And from writing the fanzine at the time, could you start to see the change?
Especially in the fans, in the support, yeah. The swing was unbelievable. The amount of letters that came flying in, what to discuss things, putting points over. That's what you wanted. The fans wanted to hear their own voice rather than what we were getting from Celtic. And and it was used as a vehicle to do that, because everybody then, supporters buses would take, say you had 10 copies on one supporters bus, everybody would probably read that magazine, and then they were discussing what they were reading. So it was moving about very quickly.
And although Not the View is definitely one of the godfathers of all the fanzines to do with Celtic, while it talked about what went on in the field, it really did highlight what was going on in the boardroom. And when you read the first ones and you see how it sort of developed, you know, at the beginning, would it be fair to say it was, you know, it was concentrating on the football a little bit more, and then as the mistakes got made off the field, it really sort of went for the jugular with the board too?
Well, there was a lot more information coming out, don't forget, by that time. You could get accounts, you know, you could get even accounts from a private kind of company like Celtic, but you had to get them on a microfiche from Company's House in Edinburgh. It cost £1 or something like that. There was people who were willing to do that and then look through the accounts, and then that gradually started becoming that sort of a, you know, informing people about, because whereas it's a hot issue these days, accounts, anybody who's a shareholder or whoever can get the Celtic accounts, the audited Celtic accounts these days. In those days it was you know, quite a secretive thing. Hardly anybody had ever seen them. You didn't know figures about season ticket sales and all the rest of it. That knowledge was kind of filtering through. People were starting to write in and say, I'll look at the books for you if you want. I'll do the accounts for you. I'll have a wee look at the accounts and write up a wee thing about it.
Do you think the club underestimated the fans?
Always have time.
Do you think they underestimate the fans today?
Well, good question. Good question. I think today it's a different issue. You know, if they don't believe that supporters are well informed, I can't give that any credibility. That idea. I think they know how well informed supporters are these days. The boards. It's a different game they've got to play now. But there are still issues, obviously.
But at that time, there's no doubt that I'm sure the custodians of the club didn't think for 1 minute that the fans would revolt in the way that they did.
No,
it just wasn't a done thing then, sure it wasn't?
No, I'm sure Sir Nicholas, whoever, never ever saw himself in a basement getting plugged, you know. I'm sure he thought it was just going to be Marie Antoinette. I'm sure she never thought that someday she was going to have her head rolling about the street of Paris. But that's what happened. They steadfastly refused to move with the times, and that's where it got them.
And still they were trying to make noises by giving Liam Brady more money to spend. But you can already see that the £1.5 million players were starting to be a thing of the past. You know, we signed Pat McGinley for 400 grand from Hibs, and then we signed Paul Byrne from Bangor. Hardly any signings that would set the heather on fire among the supporters.
No, and they couldn't even sell players for as much as they bought them. And that's what I was saying earlier on about where did these guys go after they left Celtic. There was no big money sales, never mind big money buys in those days, so they couldn't cover themselves up.
And it was round about this time that we started to hear the name Fergus McCann being whispered.
I remember a few names at the time. Paul Green was another name that was being bandied about.
Gerard Weisfield was another one.
And Fergus, yeah, there was a few. But then up steps Fergus McCann, yeah.
And at the time when we first started to hear about Fergus, I remember thinking, oh, here we go again. You know, another guy they're going to wheel out in front of us here that's going to disappear into the great wide yonder.
There's something different about Fergus. Yeah, obviously wasn't coming in on the back of the present board at the time. He was coming in and he was his interviews, I remember seeing him, even the wee snippets, he came across saying what he wanted to say and that was it. And you just I got the feeling at the time, something's happening here. I think everybody did. They knew he was different because he wasn't messing around with his talk. He was just coming in and saying, this is what I want to do. And that's what he did, all the way down the line.
And
there was rumours as well about these proxies and shares and stuff being bought up by various different people, by David Lowe and all them. There was obviously more to it than just simple bluster. There was a bit of substance behind it as well. And he was kind of making sure, as far as he could, that more and more people were getting along to these annual general meetings and EGMs that they were having at the time by giving out the proxies to ordinary supporters to come. Other guys, very eloquent speakers on behalf of the Celtic fans, like Joe Beltrami and Len Murray and people like that were beginning to turn on. Whereas up until then, Celtic board meetings had just been a case of, right, same as usual, and then let's have some chicken satay. These ones were dynamite.
You made your debut for the team on the 6th of October 1983, and that proved to be a little bit of a kiss of death for Mr. Brady, huh?
Yeah, that was basically what happened there. Was I made the debut that night against St. Johnson, and on the way back on the bus, Liam had a quiet chat with me and said, look, he was telling me what he was doing the following day. And basically I was disappointed, but I was also grateful for what he'd done for me.
Mm-hmm.
At that particular time, I just moved out of Liam's house, and I brought my own family over and had my own home. So he gave me everything that I needed to get to stabilise myself at Glasgow Celtic, and he stepped away then.
There seemed to be a good rapport between the players and Brady. And here was this guy that had been there for a couple of years, as you say, brought some of the legends back and stuff, and then he was gone. Was it a shock to everybody, or was it just all-round disappointment?
I think it's just all around disappointment, of him going, I think it's a shock, because it was just out of the blue, because he was training that morning and kicking the ball and flying around and sitting at the dugout that day and picking the team that night, and no one just actually expected it, but, when Liam made that decision, it's Liam Brady, who's the question, Liam Brady,
exactly.
on decisions on what he does,
And then, Frank Connor stayed on for a little while, and you'd probably tell me better than I would know. Liam Brady always strikes you as being a nice guy, down to earth. And then Frank Connor stayed on, and Frank was a little bit more of a disciplinarian. Would that be true?
Yes, he was, because a lot of the players had a high respect for Frank Connor, because a lot of the boys, the top players probably would have played in the reserves coming through Frank over the years, and would have known Frank over the years, and the respect they gave Frank Connor was unbelievable. And I had Frank then, the benefit I had with Frank is that Frank was in charge of the reserve side when I first went there. And for the first 6 or 7 months of my career at Celtic, I played under Frank Connor. So Frank knew what I could do, and he seen the potential and the ability. And Frank Connor, believe you me, got the best out of my ability, because he's always trying to break my jaw if I made a mistake.
There was even a feeling at the time among the players, some of the interviews I've read from some of the players at the time, and they would have been happy even for Frank to stay on. Is that true, or is that a bit way to the mark?
Definitely. I don't think any of the lads, it was like everything else, like a lot of the fans and a lot of other people outside football would have thought Frank wouldn't have the experience, but you're very, very wrong. Frank had experience in abundance, but what Frank had an advantage over everybody else before he even came in was the respect of the squad that he had at Celtic Park at the time, how they respected him. And I think that's why Lou lost the chance from a little bit, at Celtic, because a lot of lads probably didn't respect him. Coming from the likes of Stoke to such a big club, and with the players that he was bringing in at the time, I think the senior pros took, raised a few eyebrows type of thing,
And I remember whenever Lou Macari then replaced Frank on the 27th of October 1993, I was a little bit underwhelmed, and that's being diplomatic about it. Again, what was the mood whenever Lou Macari came in? Because it was hardly the glamour signing we'd all been hoping for, and I think people would have been happy with Frank Connor continuing.
Yes. When Lou came in, don't get me wrong, Lou was fantastic to me. He was brilliant to me as well. He got me fit, he got me really, kept me in good shape, he was on my case all the time, he kept me on my toes, he was very, very good to me personally. But I think some of the senior pros, without naming names, at that particular time at Celtic Park, didn't give him the respect of his manager. I think, when he first came in, everybody was, chance. But then, you know, sort of like a few months into the job with the players he was bringing in and sort of the training that the senior players wouldn't have been used to, you know, doing laps of pitches and you know, Lou was real sort of a real fitness. You can't do anything if you're not fit. He brought another lad in called Chick Bates, who really got, you know, wanted to get the lads fit, and those lads coming towards sort of, you know, the end of their careers that didn't want to do all this particular running type of thing. They wanted to play what they were used to over the years that they won trophies doing by playing five-a-sides, 20 touches of the ball, and, you know, that type of stuff. So I think that's where it went a little bit stale with a few Celtic players.
Just to put things into perspective, here's the transfers in that Lou Macari made. Wayne Biggins from Barnsley, £100,000. Carl Muggleton from Leicester, £150,000. Lee Martin from Man United, £350,000. Willie Faulkner from Sheffield United, £375,000. Andy Walker from Bolton, £550,000. Gary Holt from the Army, free. Justin Whittle from the Army, free. And here's who went out: Andy Payton, Jerry Craney, Wayne Biggins, Pat Boner, Charlie Nicholas, Frank McAvaney, Gary Gillespie, Darius Dovchak, and a few others as well. Just incredible, the heroes that went out, and the, well, as you say, maybe not Celtic class that come in.
But this is it. You know, I knew myself going to Celtic Football Club that I no given right to play in Celtic's football first team. No given right at that particular time. But when I got there, and the more I played, the more my confidence grew, I felt at that particular time, well, I'm just as good as any here. So I do deserve a chance, and I grew about an extra 5 feet, and I think that's where my career started to slide, because I became overconfident.
They were saying all this stuff. I mean, the Canvas Lang stuff was them sort of perpetrating to us that they were moving with the times, but they hadn't even put the right groundwork in there. I mean, obviously, what's been created now with Celtic Park's testament to what was achievable then, and they hadn't even explored that.
But still, the first kick of the ball, Jason, was to renovate the jungle.
Aye.
Even with all this going on in the background, they put seats in the jungle. Was that the ultimate insult to every Celtic supporter of the day?
Oh, no, I mean, I think it was only for one season as well. I think there was only seats in it for a season, 2 at the most. Aye, just before we moved to Hampden. But what an absolute waste of money. You know, total waste of money. But it was just, they were incompetent. As I say, I don't think they were inherently evil, but they were just useless.
Is it just me, or did Celtic Park look stupid with seats in the jungle?
Aye, it was a disaster.
Any time you see anywhere, it's like a temporary seating thing getting stuck in. I mean, I can remember being in the Celtic end and living across at the jungle at that time and just being kind of heartbroken. It just ripped the soul out of it.
Aye, definitely. Because that's where we all went when we were younger and things like that. And then that was the end of it, you know. The jungle's last stand, I think, being at that game. But,
the jungle's last stand, and Kevin Kelly dressed up as a tiger. There you go. Put that in your drawers. The best things that happened that year.
His wife taught me it's in Aiden's primary school. There you go. But as I say, I don't think the guy is like a bad bone in his body, but he just wasn't up for the task.
Yeah.
So 1993 to 1994, we saw Liam Brady feeling the heat a wee bit, and he took drastic measures for the start of the new season. He got rid of all his backroom staff. He got rid of Bobby Lennox, Benny Rooney, Mick Martin, and he brought in the likes of Frank Connor, Joe Jordan and Tom McAdam. And seeing Joe Jordan coming in again, I don't know how stupid I was. I was all excited again.
I was too. He went to the same high school as me, so he's for Cleveland, quite locally where I live in Wishaw. But I mean, his football pedigree was there for all to see. Leeds and Man United, he was, and he played out in Italy as well. And just his he commanded respect, and when he came here, you were thinking, this could work. You know, if he can install a bit of the fighting spirit in him that he was well known for in his Scotland days and his playing days. You were grasping at anything, you know. But these were guys who'd made their mark in football, so they'd earned respect. So they got my respect, and you just thought, surely somebody's giving them promises of money and to make us compete, you know. But another false dawn. I think he managed this for one game, didn't he?
Yeah,
Was it
he did.
when Brady left?
Yeah, that's right, he did. And Brady then signed Pat McGinley, and we're now signing Paul Byrne.
See, to be fair,
Paul Byrne had a huge reputation coming over, but he was still making the jump from Irish football to Scottish football.
I reckon Pat McGinley was excellent at Celtic. I think he was our top goal scorer that season, and then they got rid of him. You know, it was a strange one because he done really well. You know, he didn't have much support, but he done really well.
He was only there a couple of years, wasn't he? I mean, I thought Pat McGinley was a great player. Like.
Aye, and as attacking midfielder, I'm sure he was top goal scorer one year.
Mm-hmm. That was the season we were at Hampden.
Aye. Yep.
Not that it helped Liam Brady at all, because he lasted 12 league games that year, and this was probably one of my darkest moments. Liam Brady out, Lou Macari in.
Aye, I mean, I actually thought Lou Macari was a good signing again. You know what? Well, no, at the time, because again, another guy who's commanded respect, who was ex-Quality Street Gang, grew up playing for Celtic with Dalglish McGrain. You know, and he was a Celtic man as well. So, foolishly I bought into it, but it wasn't long. And
one of the strange things with Brady when he resigned, we were still in Europe at that time. I mean, we knocked out Young Boys of Bern in the first round of the UEFA Cup. I mean, we're still in Europe. But when he resigned, I mean, we got put up by Sporting Lisbon. I think that would be the games. Joe Jordan was in charge, was the first leg of the Sporting Lisbon game. I mean, we were still in Europe at that time. It just shows you how bad the league campaign was going, and how much the wrong done between Brady and the board at that time as well. And I mean, he obviously chose to leave then. Like,
Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic overall.
But as thousands joined the Celts for Change crusade, there still remained a small section of the support loyal to the board. The board had tried to play on this division by deviously claiming Celts for Change and other supporter-led protests were little more than a vehicle for a bitter Brian Dempsey. In May 1990, the club had brought onto the board Michael Kelly from a dynastic Celtic family and an outsider in Dempsey. A Lanarkshire-born Celtic fanatic, Dempsey was hoping to convince the board that with the implementation of the proposed Hillsborough Taylor report imminent, the club should move to a purpose-built arena in Rob Royston. However, relations between Dempsey and Kelly deteriorated. Kelly and fellow director Chris White then made a play to have a property developer remove the parkhead in the circle. They were successful, and just 5 months after his appointment, Dempsey was ousted. Little did they know, but the board had just drawn first blood in a civil war for the future of Celtic. Despite the shared aim of a regime change, there was no doubt though that Celts for Change was born independently from Dempsey. An increasingly divided board clung desperately onto power, and the appointments of Terry Cassidy and David Smith, the club's first non-Catholic director, were seen as an attempt to add much needed business acumen to their ranks. But with the very future of Parkhead in doubt, time was running out, and the hugely unpopular and abrasive Cassidy did little to enhance the board's reputation. Ambitious plans to relocate to the purpose-built Celtic village in Cambuslang was the board's solution to the stadium issue posed by the Taylor report. But doubts about the viability of the scheme had long been aired. In the meantime, a number of potential buyers for the club had emerged, the most credible being Fergus McCann. The Crawley-born Canadian-based businessman had made his millions through selling golf holidays in the lucrative North American market. With the backing of Dempsey, he proposed to rebuild Celtic Park by selling supporters shares in the club. A Celtic fan since childhood, McCann had originally approached the board in 1988 with an offer to provide the club with a low-interest loan to build a new two-tier executive stand in which he hoped to sell hospitality packages. His approach would be quickly dismissed. With every passing week, the Celtic board found themselves increasingly short of friends and finances. As the pressure mounted from all angles, the board announced a press conference for what they claimed would be the most momentous announcement in Celtic history. This announcement, on Friday, February 25th, 1994, would prove to be no more than another unveiling for the canvas Lang fans, with the board now claiming a Swiss bank was willing to finance the deal. A pathetic stalling tactic, it was soon discovered the supposed funding was non-existent. On March 3rd, 1994, with the reputation of the board at an all-time low and the club facing crippling debts, the Bank of Scotland summoned club officials and told them unless a guarantee of £1 million was found within 24 hours, then they would begin the process of winding up the club affairs. Finally, the board had no place to run and nowhere to hide. At the request of McCann's team, Mail-born Edinburgh businessman John Keane would provide the £1 million that would keep the bank at bay and push open the door for a takeover of Celtic. Just 24 hours later, Fergus McCann would become mechanised as the saviour of Celtic. Held on the steps of Celtic Park by an army of delirious supporters. But while McCann deserved his plaudits, the momentum for change did not come from the world of finance or big business. It came from the terraces. While men like McCann, Dempsey and David Lowe were the public faces of a Parkhead coup, it was the ordinary supporters who had fought on the front line. What groups like Souts for Change lacked in finance, they made up for in passion and the love of the club. Their rallies, their demonstrations, their campaigns, their boycotts, and their total unflinching commitment to the core values of Celtic Football Club would be every bit as important in the fight for Celtic as millions for McCann. Together, these two very different parties shared one goal: to save Celtic. They would form a formidable alliance which would eventually sweep away the old regime. As Brian Dempsey would famously comment, the Rhebels have won.
It's Celtic first and Celtic last and Celtic over all.
Well, the most important thing, or the most relevant thing that happened, and it just happened after Liam Brady resigned in October of 1993, was the AGM that year. It was Fergus, or it was the group of people that were trying to take over the club at the time, made sure that only people with paid up shares could vote. And I think it had all been sort of a bit of a blind eye being turned to that in the past, and all of a sudden you got the feeling that there was people coming in with a wee bit of savvy about them, and they'd done their homework, and they were actually going to challenge these guys.
Yeah, they definitely had a game plan, and they didn't go in blindly. They knew what to do. And the ones that were caught blind in it were the old board. They didn't have a clue what was happening.
And they'd done everything by the book, which was amazing for anything going on at Celtic at that time. You could actually see that they'd done their homework and they were educated in the ways. And at long last now, you had these guys that were in charge of the club that could no longer just bluff their way through all this, and were finally challenged with something with substance.
Exactly, because as they were running Celtic, well, as Jerry touched on there, it was all families' names. They weren't producing, they weren't doing anything. So to come up against someone like that's done their homework, a good business plan, they didn't have a leg to stand on. They were done anyway.
And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was whenever Liam Brady left and we brought in Luigi.
Well, I think he'd been managing in the lower leagues in England, wasn't he, at the time? This is a book I've read, and it's nothing wrong with a manager serving his apprenticeship down there, buying the team fish suppers on the bus and all that kind of stuff, but it was hardly a pedigree that that made you think that we were on the way back. That's for sure. A sign that what you were going to get now were guys in that kind of a wage bracket and that kind of price, and sure enough.
Again, on the part, you get the first wee boost, but you knew it wasn't going to last.
Do you think the appointment of Lou Macari also played into the hands of the guys that were forcing through the takeover? Because again, it was a stadium full of disgruntled Celtic supporters that weren't happy that Lou Macari was now boss of the team.
Wasn't one of his first signings a guy who was playing for the army or something? I know he played for the army, he's in the army or something like that.
I signed 2 guys from the army.
Yeah. Maybe they were expecting some bother. They needed some muscle on a project.
Boy Holt?
Yeah, that's right, Gary Holt, wasn't it? But the Highland Light Infantry couldn't save them by that time.
I'm sure Fergus McCann coming in eventually looked at Lou Macari in charge of that team thinking, my God, how long am I going to have to put up with this guy for?
But I think Fergus, just like off the party, had a plan. He knew what he was doing, and it has to coincide with on the pitch as well.
And still the old board came back again with Campbell's Lang again. And do you remember Stadi Various?
Yeah, it was a guy called Patrick Nally, wasn't it?
That's right.
And to go back to the point about journalism, that was reported within within a week or two. It was on a documentary, Frontline Scotland. You can still get it, I think, on YouTube. Guys in the BBC doing their job, and Trainer was on it as well. Might have been Rhebels Alderson, I think, was doing the room. And within a fortnight of that nonsense coming out, the whole thing had been unravelled. Nally was sitting there being accused of being a racketeer and all the rest of it. Looking very uncomfortable about the whole thing, and they had who are these Stradivarius? Where are they? And it was a wee kind of office above a cab rank or something like that, or it was like something above a chip shop or something like that. These were the guys that were supposed to be coming up with all this money for this state of the art super duper stadium. Totally laid bare, totally exposed within a couple of weeks of this rubbish coming out.
We seek him here, we seek him there.
When I think of Celtic, it's inside you, isn't it? It's not a word or a team or even a name. It's sort of being, isn't it? It's who you are. It's what you are. It's kind of how reflects on you. You reflect on it. It's more obviously more than a football team. It's your whole being kind of thing. It means that much. It's kind of a feeling inside. It's an emotion, isn't it? Celtic. It's nothing else apart from an emotion, a pride and a sort of passion within you.
The Timberloy is found in every street and every town.
Hairs in the back of the neck stand up. If you just said to me the word Celtic, what immediately springs to mind is when I was younger, walking up in a midweek game, probably European game, and seeing the floodlights for the first time, and then so that was probably edge of the Gallagate, and you see the floodlights, and it just lifts you. And even nowadays, I'm 42 now, and obviously the old floodlights aren't here, but even nowadays, get my in the turnstile and then walk up the steps, and just always once I see that pitch, always just pause for a moment. And it might be a wee thought about friends that have passed and gone on, or it might just be what's happening today or whatever, but just seeing the pitch for the first time nowadays, that's my moment these days.
Because he's a dedicated follower of Celtic.
My own family, we've always gone to the games as a family, we travel together, and then the wider Celtic family, it's just a privilege to be part of it.
1967 is the year we all love best, because we are dedicated.
Well, it was my uncles that always used to take us here on Blantyre Celtic supporters bus, and I remember Jimmy Johnson playing in the game, and I remember Billy McNeil. I remember my favourite football player is Tommy Gemmell, because I used to play a left back.
But how did you feel when you heard we'd Stoke to town?
Amazing. I never slept all weekend. That weekend I was so relieved more than anything. I didn't think we were going to do it, but it was like a weight off your shoulders once we found out we stop the zombies for doing it.
So, have you any confessional tales with Celtic? Did you ever fall asleep in a supporters bus or miss your run home or anything?
I've got quite a few of them. I remember getting chipped out Tannadice because of a bottle of vodka on me. Get chipped out. They didn't take my vodka off.
Hope it was Smirnoff.
It was Smirnoff, and I walked round to the main stand and I get let back in with the same bottle of vodka and carried on regardless.
Followers of Celtic. Yeah, you'll find dedicated followers of Celtic.
So even with Macari coming to the club, you know, you now had the Fergus McCann era starting to kick in.
Well, see, bring it back to Macari first, right?
Yep.
Just, I can remember when Macari got appointed, I never thought, I just thought, oh no, it done absolutely nothing for me. But at this time, I was in full pessimist mode with everything to do with Celtic. Do you know what I mean? But then, his first game in charge, we go to Ibrox, beat Rangers 2-1. Brian O'Neill scores a header in the last minute in injury time. And suddenly you think, oh, wait a minute. maybe I've got this all wrong here. Macari's come in, he's a genius. He's turned it around like overnight. So then you were starting to look forward stuff again. But again, and we had the European games coming up against Sporting Lisbon, which were close enough. I think we won 1-0 at Celtic Park and then lost 2-0 away in Lisbon. So you did think, well, we had a close tie there against one of the top teams in Portugal. And maybe Lou Macari is going to take us forward, but then that's suddenly the players that we started to sign then. And then, of course, you had the backdrop, the demonstrations at Celtic Park and the team sack the board and just people turning up for games. It was like some of our lowest crowds in years at that time. And it just suddenly, you had a sort of month spell where everything seemed it was going to be rosy again, and then it just went downhill very, very, very quickly.
But you're absolutely right. That first game that Macari took charge, I remember thinking everybody else is wrong the same as me. Here was a sweeping manager coming in here, and we've all got it wrong.
But especially to do it at Ibrox, because at that time we just couldn't get anything at Ibrox.
No, that's right. That's right. And it was a fantastic day. And again, one of those strange days, though, David, throughout all this doom and gloom. As Jason mentioned earlier on, there was some magic days too, wasn't there?
There was a real... See, that day there was a real buzz about it. I can remember going to Kilsyth Club to watch the game. It was at Ibrox, I never had a ticket. I can remember going to Kilsyth Club to watch the game. And there was an excitement because it was a new man. There's always still, even though you've got your doubts about the manager, there's still a kind of excitement when it happens. Do you know what I mean? Because there is a mystery to what's going to happen. So we were there that day. I can remember there was a band, Baltimore. I don't know if you remember them. They were playing in Kilsyth Club that day, and the place was absolutely hopping. And then to get a winner like that, there's nothing better than getting a winner in injury time in any game of football. But today at Ibrox, I can remember the place was absolutely pandemonium, and you honestly did believe this could kick on for you, Mike.
I know. We're so gullible. All right. So I've got to ask you one question before we break this part of the podcast up.
Yeah.
Where were you and what were you doing when the immortal words were uttered? The Rhebels have won.
Do you know what? I can't even remember. I mean, it happened at a time of night where it wasn't like you were getting Sky Sports News going live to Celtic Park or anything like that. I can just remember watching or reading the reports about it the next day and then seeing the footage on the news the next day. But the where and whens, I was still living with my mother and father at the time. But it wasn't like I was sitting watching it live for the steps to Celtic Park, because that just didn't happen at that time. Do you know what I mean?
I think it came on the Northern Ireland News, the wee bit at the end. There was an announcement on UTV that night. That
it must have been like 11 o'clock at night or something, was it?
Aye, because we knew that that Fergus had been called to the bank and all this here kind of stuff. The club had been called to the bank, and there was all sorts of shenanigans going on. We knew it was sort of at the tipping point. And I remember watching every sort of news programme, and do you remember those old... Remember you used to watch it on teletext, what was coming up, and phone this number and find out you've saying, Ronaldinho or something, I remember sort of followed by teletext and then seeing the pictures on the UTV news at 10:30.
But when you say that, though, where were you when you hit? But wasn't it like it happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon where somebody walked up, tapped you on the shoulder and said, by the way, the Rhebels have won? So, I mean, it happened so late at night, unless you were actually, I think, there and part of it. I mean, there was thousands of fans there because the whispers started to go around that there was something big going to happen, and loads of fans congregated in Celtic Park at the time. So I think unless you were actually part of it and there, and maybe bypass people slightly the actual moment it happened, do you know what I mean? But I can certainly remember I was still staying with my mother and father at the time. I remember watching all the news the next day and reading all the newspapers. You couldn't get enough newspapers. You might even put the Sun that day just so you could read even more about it. Do you know what I mean?
No.
That's
one step too far.
It was one of these things where it was like after you beat Rangers, you couldn't read enough for all the different newspapers about it, So that's as an actual moment in time, it was a fantastic thing, but it wasn't really a JFK moment where I could say the exact thing I was doing the minute of the day.
I'd probably the same. I can remember it as clear as day. The Rhebels have won. It's just the ultimate statement. And but I was still staying with my mum, and it was on late at night. But it just wasn't. It wasn't like I can remember what I was doing to things on the park and things scoring certain goals, and when I went to every game in Europe. Apart from Sedova and Boavista in the Seville run, and the Boavista moment, that'll live with me forever when Larsson scored a goal, things like that. But no, when the Rhebels have won, I can remember it coming on the news and stuff, and obviously, just like yourself, buying the newspapers and stuff like that. I wasn't in at Celtic Park that night, but I did have a punch into doing things like that, jumping in the car and driving into Celtic Park or something. But no, I wasn't there that night. But no, great. It was great times for the club, and at last we showed what fan power can do, and there is no support like the Celtic support that galvanises in the moments of need.
Evergreen, the story of Phil O'Donnell. In 1984, as the Celtic Phoenix rose out of the flames of the boardroom battles of previous years, a new boss was in the hot seat in the Paradise manager's office. Fan favourite Tommy Burns, who had grown up in the shadow of Celtic Park, was now in charge and was tasked with the enormous job of bringing respect back to a club who had been trophyless for 5 full seasons. Former manager Lou Macari had been acrimoniously dumped by the club's new owner, Fergus McCann, who then embarked on a bitter battle to wrestle Burns from Kilmarnock, costing the club an 8-figure fee and fines from the SFA, and, in the process, effectively ending Burns' football career. The flame-hurt Burns instantly set to work rebuilding the Celtic side, and for his first signing, he didn't have to look too far. At Motherwell, a young, lively, energetic midfielder was earmarked by Burns as a man who'd be a linchpin in his new side, and a lump sum of $1.75 million was sent southeast to the North Lanarkshire steel town to capture Phil O'Donnell. It remains Motherwell's record transfer sale, and more or less paid for a new stand at the Fair Park ground in the wake of the Hillsborough disaster and the subsequent Taylor report. Celtic fans had been used to the biscuit tin of the old Celtic board when it came to transfers, but the signing of O'Donnell was a record fee for a player, trumping that of Stuart Slater, signed from West Ham 2 years before. It was a statement of clear intent from Celtic, and Tommy Burns told the Celtic fans O'Donnell was being bought with a mind to the future progression at the club. O'Donnell's impact was immediate, and he set about making a name for himself by scoring 2 goals on his debut on September the 10th, 1994, against Partick Thistle at Firhill. He was slotted in the central midfield to provide engine room support to the aging but mercurial Paul McStay and Peter Grant. At his first home game, played away at Hampden due to the rebuilding of Celtic Park, O'Donnell rifled a goal past Hibernian keeper Jim Layton to announce his arrival at the club to an expectant Celtic support, and he hailed them as he wheeled past Leighton to drink in their cheers. The omens looked good, and it seemed like O'Donnell's signing would fulfil his potential, as Tommy Burns had planned. But with Rangers being bankrolled by the Bank of Scotland and a lingering hangover from the boardroom battles of previous years, Celtic struggled during their enforced absence at the home of the SFA, and form slumped. During that autumn, the first of the niggling injuries that would plague Phil's career presented itself, and he was absent from the team that was humbled by Raith Rovers in the League Cup at Ibrox in November 1984. He missed much of the season, but as spring sprung, he found himself back in the Celtic side, and again he was making an impact. Many Celtic fans had written the league campaign off midway through the season, despite the canny addition of Dutchman Pierre van Hooijdonk in January 1985. However, hope sprung eternal, and some optimistic fans began to believe the trophy drought which had lasted since the 1989 Scottish Cup win would be stopped in the same competition that year. After disposing of St Mirren, Meadowbank Thistle and Tommy Burns' former charges at Kilmarnock, Celtic were staring down the barrel of a cup semi-final at the scene of the crime in November, the home of the Rhebels, Ibrox Park. A turgid 0-0 draw in front of 40,000 fans led to a replay 4 days later when Celtic turned the screw on Hibs, emerging 3-1 winners, and the winning goal of the game was powered home off the head of a fit again Phil O'Donnell. And so, Celtic found themselves in a Scottish Cup final for the first time since the penalties defeat against Aberdeen 5 years before. It was a nervy encounter at Hampden against Airdrieonians, won after a headed goal by Van Hooijdonk from a pinpoint cross from recent recruit Tosh McKinley. Phil O'Donnell came off the bench to take a second medal in the Scottish Cup, his first secured in the Amber and Claret of Motherwell 4 years before, when he'd scored in a 7-goal thriller against Dundee United. Final whistle at Hampden saw a spontaneous outpouring of joy as Tommy Burns circled the Hampden turf, throwing his arms around each of the players and giving the Celtic support a day out that was the stuff of distant dreams just a few months previously. A return to the hallowed turf of paradise lay ahead for the new season, and in front of a half-built Celtic Park, Phil O'Donnell opened the scoring again against his old club on the first day of the season. Celtic were reinvigorated, and once again the future looked bright for the club. But for Phil, the spectre of injuries re-emerged, having a major effect on his form. This would continue through the following season, up to and after the sacking of his mentor Tommy Burns. But things began to look up again under Wim Jansen, who used O'Donnell's power and tidy left foot on the wing in the 1997-98 season, which saw the halt of Rangers' march towards 10 in a row and finished with a rapturous pitch invasion, which marked the return of the league trophy to Celtic Park for the first time since the centenary year. Injuries again and again stunted Phil's career, and in 1999 he accepted a lucrative offer from English club Sheffield Wednesday, leaving along with his friend and teammate Simon Donnelly for pastures new. However, he barely featured for the Owls and was finally released in 2004 to return to his first club Motherwell, along with his nephew David Clarkson, where he ascended to the rank of club captain and played in yet another cup final against Rangers in the League Cup in 2005. On December the 29th, 2007, Phil was about to be substituted in a game against Dundee United when he collapsed suddenly on the pitch. Doctors raced to his prone frame, and despite working frantically, Phil O'Donnell was pronounced dead at 5:18 p.m. that evening, stunning the Scottish game to its core. Heart failure was listed as the cause of death. Tributes flooded in, led by Scotland's First Minister Jack McConnell, and the Glasgow Derby game, due to be held a few days later, was cancelled at Celtic's request to allow players and staff at Paradise to grieve for their friend away from football. Motherwell erected a permanent memorial to the player they branded Uncle Phil by renaming their main stand in his honour, which was fitting as his record transfer fee paid for the stand adjacent, named after Davy Cooper in 1995, who had suffered a similar fate to Phil O'Donnell when playing for Motherwell. Celtic would mark his legacy with 60,000 fans who watched the reunited Celtic side of 1988 take on the Motherwell Cup-winning side at Celtic Park in May 2008, and all proceeds were shared between the British Heart Foundation and Glasgow anti-poverty charity Mary's Meals. With a sad end to a bright career, Phil O'Donnell will be remembered an evergreen as a player who helped end the trophy famine and stop the 10 in the 1990s. He lives on forever in the hearts of those he left behind.
And they just didn't learn their lesson, did they? Because then it wasn't long before they started talking about Gaffanor. And Campbell's Lang was going to kick off again.
I mean, but that was, they saw themselves, I think, as, like their, I'm not sure what relation Bob Kelly was to them, but he was a guy who thought that he could run a football team and do the business side of things, albeit in the days when the business side of things just meant counting the cash from the turnstiles at the end of the day, at the end of the match, and paying the players their wages, what they thought they were worth, and all that kind of stuff. But this was a board that couldn't do anything. They couldn't pick any football people. They were hopeless at that. They were hopeless at running the business side of things. And Michael Kelly was supposed to be a PR guy, and you'll struggle to find a period in Celtic's history when the PR was worse.
Yet they never learned from their mistakes. It went again and again and again.
They were just old and they were set in their ways. They just didn't know what to do. Fresh ideas were coming in, and they weren't coming from them. And up against it, that was them. They were finished.
I mean, they were being besieged. They were under attack from all sides, from Fergus McCann and his people, and from the fans and all that. They didn't know what way to turn, and eventually it just became a case of, they saw it as their club, and they wanted to do whatever they could to keep their position in it, and that's all it became after a while.
And then finally, where were you when the news was announced?
What about Fergus?
The Rhebels have won. That one.
Yes.
Outside the ground.
I'd like to say it was outside the ground. I had the flu. I was in my bed, but it kind of picked me up a wee bit.
Bad flu.
What's your recollection of that day? From the news early on that the boys had been called into the bank and all this here kind of stuff, and were on a countdown to extinction.
It was frightening. It was absolutely frightening. You were just going, this can't be happening. But with the immortal words, the Rhebels have won. It was a great statement outside the ground. It was just like relief. But you still had in the back of your mind, is it going to really happen? Is it going to move on? And obviously it did.
And that whole day, did you think for any minute that it wasn't going to happen?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We were up there. We were up at one of the pubs at Parkhead Crossway, and we're just, like everybody else, we're just going, wonder what's going to happen. We're just in disbelief what was happening as well. But as I said, once the Rhebels had won, it was just, that was it. You kind of felt in your heart, these guys that are standing, well, Fergus especially was just standing there, and you could just tell by his whole body language, he wasn't like a fist pumping or anything. You just kind of felt, this guy's done it.
So that was the 3rd of March 1994. What about the next day? Did you think, all right, a new day had finally dawned?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a feeling like that. I don't think anybody really knew what was going to come next, but
we definitely knew we had to get rid of the board.
That was a kind of single issue. That was the one single issue that it just couldn't go on any longer like that. And you're talking about guys, the straw that broke the camel's back and all that. I think if you look at the Willie Faulkner transfer, I think that was the one they couldn't pay for Willie Faulkner to come up from wherever it is he came from, and they bounced the cheque or something, or they wouldn't fund that transfer, and that's what kicked the whole thing off. So good on you, Willie Faulkner.
Something you didn't hear very often.
It's the only guy I ever saw getting injured while celebrating a goal. Didn't happen very often, right enough.
And even that season then was a write-off. I mean, we still sort of limped along, and it didn't really matter, did it?
No, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
In actual fact, in a lot of ways, it was better crack, if you see what I mean. A lot of the strain was off, and I think you can throw a kind of desperate team, if you can see, prospects of it getting better, if you see what I mean.
The battle wasn't so much on the pitch then, it had swayed so much to removing the board. We knew we weren't winning anything. We'd gone through all that. We just had to get something different, and it wasn't getting a player on the park now, it was getting the players off the park. that were running the show. And that felt like a massive victory.
But there weren't big promises made on the steps that night.
No, there wasn't at all.
You know, in fact, there was nothing. There was just more or less, yeah, we're in charge.
See if they turned around and said we're going to buy such and such a player, not, I would have worried. Everybody would have been worried. They would have just went, no, this is not what we're buying into.
But he had published these all his plans and all of that before that. He had made it well known.
Yeah.
What he saw as his vision for Celtic Park, say for instance, and what he saw as a Celtic shareholding, i.e., not all these shares in the hands of 4 or 5 families. You know, that's what people were buying into. That's what you were expecting to happen. But like a politician in his manifesto and all that. Once the new government starts up, and he knew it was going to take a while. You can't do it overnight. But he had told us what he was going to do, and sure enough, it wasn't too long before you actually saw the results of that, before the bulldozers started moving in, right?
So how did the fanzine report this?
The issue that it came out, the issue after it, the issue after Fergus, I think it was a photo of Fergus on the front cover, and he's saying in it, tell the bank manager he can come out from under the bed now.
And your wee fingers must have been taped off you over the next few days after that, were they?
Oh, aye, but it was good. You know, it was good. It was optimism then after that, I think.
It was brilliant because the whole mood just changed, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Even talking to you two right now, after what we've talked about for the last hour, and some of the names we've mentioned and some of the things that happened, you know, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was bloody awful. Even when you talk about that whole takeover day, it lifts your mood, doesn't it? Even today.
Yeah, does it give you a wee tingle inside?
I can hear it in your voices. Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to close off the podcast on this note, because I think that's a very important part of our history, and I have an awful lot of things to add into this section of the podcast. So I'm going to cut it off there and let the next poor fool then take it on to see where it goes after this.
Well, remember back in the day we didn't have anything at all. As my father said to me today, he says it's amazing how you can talk to someone the other end of the world just by not even like in your house on a phone. So the fanzine, when it first came out, the information you get now, it's remarkable. And as I touched on with the journalists as well in Scotland, it's amazing what they did back then.
Especially compared to today. And you just mentioned there about all the technology at your fingertips. So when you look at 1984 compared to 2013 and the advancement in technology, and they just don't seem to get it right today, so they don't.
Well, they're the only journalists in the world, I think, where you've got a story, cracking story, major story, on your plate, and you're running away from it.
It's unforgivable. I mean, for God's sake, was there not just one person that wanted to make a name for himself?
Evidently not. It's incredible.
I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to say about it, because even when you look at guys like yourselves that do a fanzine, you know, and all the other social media outlets that we have out there today, people writing blogs and people doing podcasts and all this here kind of stuff, and everybody's talking about it, except for the media.
Yeah. We did a bit in the magazine called We Hear That, and it would be guys telling us stories, true stories that were happening. And when you read that, everybody would talk about it and going, oh, such and such, we hear about this, hear about that. And you get this all over the internet now, and you know fine well, a lot of it could be bull, but you're getting actual facts and documents to back things up, and the Scottish media just won't touch it. It's actually disgusting. The Scottish media here are absolutely disgusting that they won't touch anything now.
Is it because they're afraid to get sued, or
No.
It couldn't be, right?
No chance. Well, that's what I said. Look at the way they actually helped Celtic a way back by, and I said us. They didn't actually feed us anything or gave us anything. I'm saying us as in Celtic fans, by rubbishing within a week all these canvas-lang stories. They weren't doing it to help Celtic fans. They were doing it because probably that was their job, and they kind of liked sticking it into Celtic as well. But it's remarkable how they won't do it now.
The away kit used in 1990 and 1991 was a radical yellow design used from the previous season. This shirt had green arrow-like patterns which were located along the shoulders, and green stripes were featured on the arms and just below the abdomen. Dark green shorts were used and accompanied by yellow socks with green umbro diamonds featuring just below the knee. In 1991 to 1992, seen the introduction of the worst Celtic kit ever. It was horrendous. A descending line graph pattern across the chest similar to the current Sevco share price shenanigans, a sickly lime green panel at the bottom, and a green two-tone mouldy shoulder patch were hardly helped by a ludicrous red, white and blue of the People's Ford sponsorship logo. Dark green shorts with a further green diagonal flash featured in the right thigh was finished off with lime green socks. In 1992 seen the club's first ever black kit introduced. This had light green stripes and a white trim featuring to help lighten the shirt. A wing collar also featured on this shirt, and like all other Umbro supplied teams at the time, the Celtic crest was placed in a different shaped shield. Through the 1992 season, no sponsor featured on the Celtic away kit. Black shorts were worn with a green trim around both thighs. A white Umbro logo and text also featured along with the Celtic crest encased in a shield. Black socks with a green trim below the knee were used with white Umbro diamonds featuring throughout the green area. 1993 to 1994 seen the exact same black away kit used, but the only change this season was that the white C.R. Smith logo being placed across the chest.
With the four-leaf clover on my breast and the green and white upon my chest.
So the final question for this part of the history podcast. So it's March 1994 and some guy has come in from Canada that nobody even knew of, nobody even knew very much about, let's put it like that, and has just bought the club. What were your expectations at that time?
Me, I'll go first. To be honest with you, I'd sort of gave up trusting people. So the jury was out for me. You know, the jury was definitely out for me. So I know he gave us his promises what he was going to deliver, but I'd seen enough false dawns that I wasn't totally convinced. But hats off to him. I take my hats off to Fergus because he delivered everything that he said. But I'm not going to be one of these revisionists and look back and say I fully supported him all the time, because I didn't. I certainly didn't boo him, but I wasn't his biggest fan. And even to this day, people reckon we should name a stand after him and that. Well, I think he got 20 million quid, so he got enough. You know, I don't think he needs a stand named after him. Let him pay for it and get the stand named after him. Give 5 million back. But no, it was one of the most amazing things to happen for Celtic as it transpired, and when we look back on it now. But at the time, I wasn't his biggest fan, but he certainly delivered everything that he promised he would. And hats off to him, and I'll always be eternally grateful for him.
I think for a lot of fans, the fact that Brian Dempsey was so much involved with all that at the start kind of gave us more trust in him than it had been somebody just come in out the blue. And the fact that Tommy Burns was there, the manager at the time, and he sort of supported them as well, it kind of gave you an idea that things would go in the right direction. I think Brian Dempsey was the main guy in it for me at that time. It was somebody that I could really relate to as a fan, because he spoke to us how we deserved to be spoken to as supporters, and they were telling you the truth. And at the end of the day, they just went in and saved the club. And you thought, well, if the guy's got to come in here to Canada, he's going to put his money on the table. He's certainly putting his money where his mouth is, and he must have big plans. And I think it's when you started seeing Celtic Park getting rebuilt.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That you really did start thinking, no, this is the real deal. This is happening.
But does any of you remember any other club where the fan base had so much of an impact that it ended up it ousted a whole board? Well, practically a whole board.
Probably not. You know, Man United fans now went out, obviously, with the Glazers and things like that, but then they just sort of went back to supporting their team. I know some of them formed that FC United, and they went in big marches and stuff like that. But no, I don't think so. The one thing for me is, did we get lucky? You know, because although we ousted the board, Fergus, what if he was a Charles Green or a Craig White type character? We would have still a bit of trust in him, I think. I don't know, but I always wonder about that. They're saying that, did we just put our trust in him blindly, and lucky for us he was a man of his word? Or had the due diligence been done, and had guys like Brian Dempsey and Wisefield and things like that, had they done the homework behind him and made sure he was a man of integrity and that his track record spoke volumes? I don't know. See, I wasn't involved in business back then. I wasn't like clued up in these kind of things, and I'm still not to a certain extent, but I don't know if we got lucky or they had done the homework.
You can see how supporters do put faith into something new as well. But you're absolutely right, Jason, and that's an absolute cracking take on the whole thing. We just wanted something new because we knew what we had wasn't good enough and was leading us down into a dark hole. And yeah, we could have ended up with a Charles Green, but thankfully there was cleverer people probably than us behind the scenes that checked all that out.
Yeah, that's what I always wonder if people had done their homework, or it was just basically this was a guy that was going to put the £1 million in, because I know your man, him that lifted the John Keane, was it the guy who raised the flag last week? You know, I think he was the guy that actually put the money in the bank account. But there's a few unsung heroes, I bet you, and obviously what guys like Mark McGlone and other guys in Celts for Change done. You know that. I mean, the amount of time and effort they guys put into it was phenomenal.
Do you know as well though, that season, right? And even although we played at Hampden, and I mean that year at Hampden, it felt, I mean it wasn't home obviously, but it felt so alien, completely alien playing at Hampden, right?
Yeah.
But we brought in Van Hooijdonk, right? And you were thinking, God, we've actually signed a big foreign player here, like. Do you know what I mean? But that was completely new for us. And then we went on to lift the Scottish Cup and break that sort of trophyless drought. And that gave a big, massive, good feeling coming in the club at that time as well in that season. So we definitely benefited for that. And of course, you were getting updates of the Celtic Park getting built all the time. And it was an exciting time to be a Celtic. It wasn't just that it was new, but it was new and it was better as well, and you knew it was better.
Absolutely, and obviously when you seen the new stadium taking shape, you know, it looked amazing.
We had arranged to have a meeting and put pressure on the bank, and about 250, 300 people turned up that day. Now, after every rally and demonstration, there was a concern that we wouldn't be able to pay for the hall, because paying for the hall at Glasgow City Hall's, the biggest hall, which I think held 1,250, was about £425, £450. So before the rally even started, we explained this to the fans. And we said, look, we're going to put a couple of buckets round. So we knew some trusted people, pass keepers at various chapels, and they went round with the buckets and people put money in. Now, that's an important point, actually, because if people hadn't put money in, we couldn't have paid for those, five guys couldn't have paid a bill of £425, for a campaign where you're trying to do something and you've got no official backing. You've got no backing from anybody, money-wise. Mm-hmm. So therefore, that's an important point. The fans, put in, and we had a bit of money left over, so we get banners made up and we get placards made up. And that particular day, outside the Bank of Scotland, there's various books around with the picture in it, actually, and it says Bank of Scotland stop. Bank of Scotland stop backing up a bankrupt club. So we were standing outside and I was chatting. It was all good natured. It was about 12:30 in the afternoon. And we were all there, and Davy Cunningham and I said to Davy, I think we should go in and speak to the bank manager. Now, this was in George Square. The fans were all in George Square, so it was a great place to meet because it wasn't causing any congestion in the street. They were all in the square. And I think the pub is now called the Counting House, which is in the corner of George Square on St Vincent Street. So we went into the bank, and that was the big head office for the Bank of Scotland in Glasgow. And went up to the girl and I said, hi, can we speak to the manager, please? And she looked at me like I had horns and said, I'm afraid he's not in. And I said, is the assistant manager in? And she says, no, what is it you want? And I said, well, there's about 250 people outside. I said, and they're going to come inside and open up a bank account with £1. I said, and then they're going to go back out again, come back in and close the bank account. Now, that was to cause utter chaos in the bank,
250 people times 2, opening and shutting is 500 transactions on a Friday afternoon isn't what the bank want. But we had to use it as a leverage, and she says, hang on a minute, and disappeared and came back, and within about 3 minutes, Davey and I were in sitting having a cup of tea and a custard cream with the manager. So the manager had said, the guy was brand new, and he said, hi, he said, I kind of know roughly what the situation's about, and just explain your piece. And so he said to him, we're concerned fans, we brought along some fans today, and they were trying to make the point that you keep backing up a club who can't pay its debts, and we're concerned about that. And he says, yeah, I hear what you say. I said, the club are basically insolvent just now. They're running up this massive debt. And if you think back to 93, 94, having £6.5 million debt was an awful lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
An awful lot of money. There was no Sky TV around. There was no major money coming into the club. We had just started getting sponsorship in the late 80s in the jersey and things like that. But there wasn't a hell of a lot about. So, you had to ask where the money was coming from. To pay the debts. So the guy was actually great. He was brand new, and he says, I'll take on board, and I'll have a think about this, and I'll make a report, and I'll put it forward to the relevant people above me in the bank. So we left, and it was mission accomplished, and we got great coverage in STV News that night at 6, and also in BBC Evening News as well. And after the boycott game, which was on the Tuesday, that'd be March the 1st, the bank issued a statement. There was 8,225 people at the boycott game. You think about it, 8,225. About 1,750 of those were Kilmarnock fans. And the bank issued a statement the next day that they were calling in the board to find out what they were going to do about the debt they had. So I really felt then, and so did the rest of the lads, that we had turned a major corner. Things were really happening now. Pressure was getting put on the board to either put up and sort out the debt or disappear and let people come in and save Celtic, the money people. And Fergus McCann was the guy there. And on March the 4th, when the bank had called in the debt, David Lowe called Fergus McCann. David Lowe was a financial advisor across here who had been buying shares up from the Kelly and White families and people associated with their families. And John Keane, a marvellous man, Brian Dempsey, another great guy, and they were backing up David Lowe to go around and try and get shares. I think they got about 35% of shares. And he would basically go to somebody. There were stories, a lady down in England, somewhere near London, and he would say, hi, I've got a register here. I'm working on behalf of a group trying to get shares in Celtic Football Club, would like to buy your shares. And she would say, oh yeah, I think they're in the top drawers here, I don't really know much about them. And her husband had passed on years earlier. And he would say, well, I'll offer you X amount. Some of these shares were getting sold for £250, £300 each.
Mm-hmm.
So she would say, yeah, well, I've been in there, and my husband's not around anymore, and yeah, what are you offering? And I think that particular lady ended up with £20,000 worth of shares, and she had bad health, asthma, and things like that. And from memory, she took off and enjoyed a happier life in Spain and somewhere like that. So that's how shares were collected. On March the 2nd, the board called in, the head of the bank called in the Celtic board and said, what are you going to do about this? And they basically says, we can't do anything. David Lowe phoned Fergus McCann. Fergus was in Scottsdale, Arizona at the time. And he flew back overnight on March the 3rd, landed at Glasgow Airport at 10 o'clock on March the 4th. The bank had given a deadline of £1 million sterling to be deposited in as a holding figure till the following Tuesday, Wednesday, when they wanted another 3 or 4 million. And Fergus was the guy who did that. He landed at 12. David Lowe met him. They went to another bank in St Vincent Street. Can't remember what it was. With about 20 minutes to deadline, both of them literally jogged down. Imagine Fergus, jogging down, holding files and papers under his arms.
Holding his bonnet on.
know, an absolute true story. They jogged down to the bank, and they got there. I think David Lowe famously says he looked at his watch, and it said 11:52, and the £1 million was deposited. And then Fergus then had to do a deal with the old board to get them out, because although the club was bust and worthless money-wise, they wanted money for their shares. Now, at that point, he owned nothing. He had put in £1 million. People should always remember this point. It's very relevant. Fergus put £1 million of his money into the bank to stave off anything happening, any receivership happening that day to Celtic, but he didn't own anything in Celtic. He basically gave £1 million and didn't own anything. He then had to go and negotiate a deal. And, you know, the sad thing for me is these guys that said they were great custodians of the club, the old board, they sat down with Fergus McCann and various other people in Celtic Park that night on March the 4th and negotiated money for their shares. Those three people were Chris White, Michael Kelly, and an on-family member called David Smith. He was a sort of London sort of brains financier guy. The guys that didn't accept the money, and this is important also, the guys that didn't accept the money were Tom Grant, Kevin Kelly, Jack McGinn, and Jimmy Farrell. They did not accept the money, and they stayed part of the new group. They kept their shares in Celtic and didn't take any. But the other three took as much as they could get. And the story from inside the boardroom on that evening was that Fergus wasn't paying them a thin dime. He wasn't giving them anything at all. That was one of his famous phrases. I won't pay these people a thin dime. David Lowe advised Fergus McCann. He said, you have to change your strategy right now. This is important. You have to change the strategy just now. You have to give them money, or else the club will go into some form of receivership. They have to be bought out. Even though you despise the fact of having to give them money for a club that's bust, they hold the shares, and you have to do it, or else you have to let it drift. And remember, you put £1 million in 8 hours ago at the bank. And Fergus eventually put a pot in, and I believe the pot was between 1.2 and 1.4 million to buy out the other three guys. As far as I know, I don't think they've been seen around Celtic Park since.
Mark, when you hear that story, it's amazing, you know, to think what was going on. Whenever you guys were sort of doing what you were doing from a fan's perspective and all that kind of stuff, did you have concerns that after you went to the bank that it would still all fall apart, that the Fergus McCann wouldn't have come through or the Brian Dempsey wouldn't have come through? Was there always that niggling sort of thought in the back of your minds?
Well, yeah, there always was that niggling thought. And around about December or late November 1993, Fergus McCann actually came in with an offer. This is quite astounding. He came in with an offer to buy the whole lot, everybody out, everything at Celtic Park, pay the debt off of £17.5 million. That's an awful lot of money. That happened around about November, December. The board at that time, even though faced with this debt, couldn't understand that was a good deal. Now, to be honest with you, you have to ask a question. You couldn't understand that was a good deal. So what happened a day or two later, Fergus was fed up, disgusted. He had said he'd had enough. He was going back to Canada. He lived in Montreal. He was going back to Canada. He was forgetting the whole thing. So Brian Dempsey arranged a dinner at the Hospitality Inn in Cambridge Street. It's called something else now, but the big hotel in Cambridge Street was called the Hospitality Inn at the time. And I remember clearly, it was on the 8th floor, and there was 8 people, and their 8 partners invited along. It was a wee surprise dinner to say thank you to Fergus from Brian as to all the effort he had made, but you know, after that 17.5 had been knocked back, he'd had enough. He was sickened. He knew it was a great deal, and you know, just if they're not taking it, no point banging your head off a brick wall here. Brian, unbeknown to anybody at the table, or maybe a surprise to me, asked all of the guys at the table when they'd finished their dinner to stand up and say something about Celtic. And I thought, cacking it here big time. You know, I'm standing with these kind of business type guys and various other people, and I have to stand up and say something about Celtic. So fortunately I was sort of last of the 9. I was away at the bottom of the table, and everybody spoke up and spoke very well. Fergus was about 2 in front of me, and he spoke and he stood up And I tell you what, if I ever needed convinced that this guy wasn't just about money and that he was a real Celtic fan and he understood the heart and soul of Celtic and what it means to people and the way of life and what it brings to you, he stood up and he said, we should always remember that everything we've achieved in life, we've achieved in our own merits without having to join any secret organisation to get there. And we should carry that with us in life and be proud of that fact. That blew me away. And 20 years later... I
feel like clapping.
20 years later when I hear that, I thought, wow, that's everything. That's everything. And I just got up and I probably spoke the biggest load of nonsense out. And probably sat down as quick as I got up.
So you must look back today with an awful lot of pride in what you've done as well. You know, as a, let's use the term, as a regular Joe supporter. You know, you and the guys and all the support that you've got from the group, you know, changed the history of the club.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's still quite hard to believe. I mean, sometimes I can't square it. Sometimes I can't square it all in my mind what actually was achieved. Because when we set out to do this, we were young guys with big mouths, trying to do something about Celtic. But when you look 20 years later, you actually see the effect, because when we were doing it, you have to remember we thought, will this work? Will we be here next week? We'll have enough money to pay this hall. That's what the priorities were at the time. But when you think 20 years later of what's been achieved and, you know, the good position the club are in money-wise and, you know, the massive stadium that's been built and, you know, the old board wanted to take us to Cambuslang. But the real problem there, taking you to Cambuslang, is you'd have became a tenant of some big landowner from London or somewhere else who would have built, you know, a cracking big stadium for you. But nobody builds big stadiums for nothing. So the big stadium that would have built, you'd have been in debt to them for the rest of your life because you'd have been paying them rent to play a ground which is not Celtic Park. Now, the hardest thing to do when you're putting up a new building is to work and build a new stadium on the existing site, and that's what Celtic did. And of course we went to Hampden that year, which I might add, we paid them £900,000 for renting that place for a year. It was soulless, as you know, but at least when we went back, the North Stand was up and the other parts of the ground were getting put together. So back to the original point, yeah, I still scratch my head. I still can't square all of it in my mind. I remember Brendan Sweeney saying to me 20 years ago on Takeover Night when Brian Dempsey came out onto the steps, and he famously said, and this is exactly what he said, I'm repeating a word here, and what I'm going to say, because this is exactly what he said. He said, the game, he paused and says, the game is over. The Rhebels have won. Now, wow, you could have shot me with a cattle bolt right through my head and I wouldn't have felt it. We just leapt around because he had just come outside from doing the deal inside of Fergus, etc. And he was telling the fans that was it. That was a tearful moment, hugging, everybody danced around. It was a very energetic night. There was rain lashing, there was angry skies, there was wind blowing, there was energy everywhere, and the Rhebels had won. And at that point you didn't actually realise what was going to be happening next. So fast forward 20 years this coming March, yeah, I do look back at it with a lot of pride. Fantastic.
Matt, thanks for joining us in the Celtic History podcast, and also thanks for playing the part that you played along with all the other lads. And
well, I have to say it was a big team effort. You know, it was a major team effort, and I think you know, all the guys, as Brendan Sweeney said 20 years ago, when we're old men, we can sit at night, go to our beds and think, well, we did something for Celtic. And to have the stone laid outside Celtic Park a couple of months ago was an absolutely fantastic moment. Next to the Jimmy Johnson statue, for any fan, I had chats with the club, and I said we don't want any names here. I didn't want any individual names because Celts for Change might have been 5 guys, but they could never have done anything without the tens of thousands of people that eventually supported us. So I said to the club, we don't want any Celts for Change names mentioned in this, and if that's okay with you. They said, that's fine, yeah, because it wasn't about individuals, it wasn't about the group, it was about the entire love, and the Celtic community stood up when it mattered, and they saved their own club. And if we look across the road just now at the utter disarray and mess of every spiv from London to wherever, trying to get money out of them, and they are just hanging on in there, again emphasises what was achieved 20 years ago.
But I don't know if you can remember, I know we beat Airdrie in the Scottish Cup final. Wasn't a great game, but goal for Big Pierre. But if you can remember the semi-final, I think it was one of the first times ever we played Hibs at Ibrox, and it was a Friday night. You remember that? It was 0-0. I think we beat them 3-1 in the replay, but it was 0-0 on a Friday night against Hibs. And I can always remember the clamber for tickets. And this, we sold out like 3/4 of Ibrox, you know, and there was a buzz about the crowd. You know, as if like we were on the verge of something special. And I remember that night we beat Airdrie, we celebrated like Celtic had won the European Cup. You know, because obviously that was the first trophy in like 5.5 years or whatever, or 5 years. And it was so much a relief, you know, so much a relief just to get over the winning line and celebrate winning a cup again. Because these are the best times of your life when you're in your early 20s and things like that. And we didn't have any things to celebrate, you know. We'd know, you sort of forgot what it was like, and probably Harper, that's the first time you were like, legally drinking in pubs when Celtic won anything.
Definitely. Do you know what I can always remember of that cup final was being so happy for Paul McStay and Peter Grant. Peter Grant had, I think, his best game in a Celtic jersey that day. I mean, if you remember, he covered every blade of grass. And I don't know if you remember the run up to the game. He was injured in the semi-final. There was supposed to be no chance he would play in the final. I can remember there were stories about him being down the Clyde or something, dipping his feet in the water to sort his ankle. He had a big, massive swollen ankle. But I can remember Paul McStay at the end of that game, and the famous picture of him getting lifted up. Was it Tommy Burns lifting him up on the pitch? Or was it Peter Grant? I can't remember. The two men, Paul McStay in the centre of the pitch, and just the sheer joy and relief and emotion on his face for him as the Celtic captain to pick up his first trophy as Celtic captain was just amazing. Like.
Aye, and it's like he's one of the ultimate icons. He's one of my wee brothers. He's his favourite all-time player. He's a guy I've met a few times, and so humble, and what a player he was. I mean, if you look back, I kind of wish he had left and went to a top European club just to see what he could have done, because he was that good. But he dedicated his full football life to Celtic, and Harper, I echo every bit of that sentiment. I'm absolutely delighted for him, delighted for Tommy Burns, and delighted for the rest of the players. And obviously after the heartbreak of Wraith Rovers, one of my proudest moments of being a Celtic supporter was the Hibs the following week. There was a big massive flag, Paul McStay, you'll never walk alone. And it was every Celtic fan that was at Easter Road that day was a real Celtic. Well, I'm not saying any Celtic fans better than other Celtic fans, but it was one of the times that we had to rally on our own, and we did. And we made Paul McStay realise that we're all behind him, and nothing that he could do in a football park would ever sully the feeling we've got for him, because he's just as a Celtic legend. And his full family steeped in Celtic tradition. I'm sure his grandfather played with Celtic, and I've had a few pints with his dad. He's quite local here as well, and just a legend and lovely guy, a lovely family, and just absolutely delighted for him lifting that trophy.
See, just not to go off too much on a tangent, just talking about Paul McStay, Jason, do you remember the game where we thought he was leaving? And it was his last game for Celtic, and he ran over the jungle.
Threw his boots into the jungle.
And he flung his boots in. I can tell you right now, I'm not ashamed to say it, I was in floods of tears that day. I was absolutely heartbroken that Paul McStay was leaving. See, I can remember walking at the stadium, I was still in tears. I think the story was it was Liverpool and Inter Milan were the two teams that were fighting out to sign him, but then, of course, he had to change of heart, and he signed the contract and he signed in the end, like, no. But as you just said, he's your wee brother, but he was my Celtic hero, I suppose. I don't know if I have heroes now at this age, but he was definitely my hero then. He's my all-time favourite Celtic player now.
Yeah. The funny thing about that, and we'll wrap it up here, is that I remember at the time the media in Scotland were dying for Paul McStay to leave Celtic. It was going to be another nail in the coffin. Here's your best player, a true Celt, one of yous, and he's going to leave. And they were lapping it up. And see, when he didn't, it was magnificent.
Aye. And he's just see when you think when he was a young boy as well, see when he burst through, see some of the goals he scored from outside the box and things like that, they were unbelievable. Nothing but great memories of Paul McStay, and just delighted to get the chance to lift trophies.
One wee last thing on McStay is it's a funny wee story. One of my best friends, still is one of my best friends, Rangers fan. I've known him since we were 3-4 year old, like, no? And proper Rangers fan, like, no season ticket. He was a season ticket holder, not now, but
does he support the new team?
Well, he lives down in England now, so he will support the new team as well. He's still a Rangers fan, like, no? But I can remember he was a decent football player as well when he was younger than that, and he always tried to model himself on Paul McStay. Paul McStay was one of his favourite players, even though he was a pure dyed-in-the-wool Rangers fan. But as a player, I think Paul McStay was one of these guys that everybody could appreciate.
Aye, definitely.
And on that happy note, gentlemen, I'll bring a close to this part of the Celtic History podcast. Jason and Harper from the HomeBhoys, absolute pleasure, lads, and that was great fun. Thanks a million.
Cheers, man. Thanks for having us.
Pleasure, mate. Hail, hail.
To play football the Glasgow Celtic way.
I wanted to bring you back to the 1st of March 1994, and it was the Kilmarnock match that the fans boycotted. What was the atmosphere at the club among the players through the Celts for Change and all the goings on with Fergus coming in and that kind of stuff? First of all, what was the boycott match like?
It was horrible. It was horrible. You know, to see these fans who were so passionate for all these years to, you know, really they must have felt really, really strongly about what they wanted for the club, and they could see where the club was going and what was happening to the club, and they felt real strong, because I don't think in my lifetime I'll ever see another Celtic fan boycott at Celtic again ever again. Mm-hmm. So at that particular time, they must have felt really, really strong and passionate of what they wanted in that change.
And did the players support what was going on off the field too?
I think there was a bit of a divide there. Yes, I think there was a bit of a divide. You know, the senior players, called the senior players, would have. Myself personally, and a few of the other, Brian McLaughlin, Simon Donnelly, that we were only all breaking through. We were just happy to be involved in the Celtic football team. But I think the senior pros knew exactly what was happening at that particular time.
And then on the famous day, you know, 4th of March 1984, when the phrase "the Rhebels Have Won" was coined, was there a sense of relief among the players that finally it looked like the old regime was dead and a new day was dawning?
Yes, definitely. The likes of things, like, you know, the Celtic history is, you know, there's players at the club now. I spoke to Danny McGrain about this, and like, there's players now in football. Football's turned into a business now, and I think this passion and the diehard of really wanting to play for your club has gone. I think there's players coming in now, the likes of Charlie Nicholas and Pat McAvenny and Paul McStay, all these boys, were all true passionate Celtic, through and through, just wanted to play football, didn't care about the money at that particular time. I just think now it's a dying breed that, you know, you put on a jersey and you want to die for that club.
And then, of course, the first strike from the Fergus regime came whenever Lou Macari was fired. Did the players sense something big on the horizon? Were they glad to see the back of Macari? Were they delighted to see Fergus coming in and maybe a few pounds sunk into the team? Or was there fear there of the uncertainty that was approaching?
Yeah, I think there was a bit of mixed emotions, basically. On the players' side, you know, we never really knew the ons and dons of the Fergus McCann. A lot of people will turn around and say Fergus made promises to us and he fulfilled his promises. He built Celtic Park.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have other people saying things, and you have other people saying, you know, Fergus McCann came in, he brought in. I think it was Fergus brought Tommy Bhoys back.
It was.
So, you know, Fergus McCann, you know, in what he said he was going to do and what he done, and who he appointed to, you know, to make that first step back towards the success of the club, which is Tommy Burns, which all happened. So, in my eyes, what Fergus promised, he delivered.
Most of the football greats have
look even at Gaffner and how quickly that came out, why does that not happen today? I mean, when you looked at all the loans that Rangers have made and, you know, all the contracts they signed, they were able to get down to the bottom of Gaffner within 24 hours.
Yeah. Well, you can get it today. I mean, you'll get it on Rangers tax case website when it was still going, or Celtic Quick News or something like that.
Scottish Football Monitor.
You'll read it there, but don't expect to see it in the newspapers or on one of the newspapers' websites, because they just won't touch it.
The internet bampots are like the old day fanzines, in a way. The Celtic board would never believe anything that was written about them.
There's no doubt about that, and I think a lot of the social media sites that have grown up, and the message boards like the Huddle board and Carrydale Street or whatever one's is your fancy, you know, they have definitely grown up from the fanzines.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about Not the View and some of the stronger fanzines that survive, there is still a place for a fanzine today. I think people just enjoy buying a fanzine and reading it.
It passes a half an hour on the bus when you're going home from the game, I think, these days, but you're not going to find any news in it as such, because the news is already out there, and the rumours are about 4 weeks old or something like that, so everything you've heard. So I think we're in the retro market now, I think, these days, crusties like us, you know. I mean, it's, we harken back to the good old days, as opposed to trying to be current or relevant or funny. Because that ain't happening.
I'll tell you what is fantastic for anybody that hasn't read it, to go into the Not the View site and read the accounts of the Times of all this stuff we talked about tonight. Because I swear to God, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, I was in tears reading some of it today, just some of the wee off-the-cuff comments that were being made, you know, well, if you thought this was bad, wait till the next season. You know, just stuff like that. And when you get down...
Anybody, I tell you what, honestly, see anybody that complains these days about... You know, and you feel like an old fart, you know, you feel like, oh, you sort of a bitch, you should have been at during a Hampden season and all that with us. Oh, it's a bit like that, and my granda was like that as well, God rest his soul. You know, and he would kind of be like that when you were complaining in the 70s or something. This is a guy that, you know, he lived through the 50s, where I think the only thing, they won a League Cup and a Cup or something like that, and they beat Rangers 7-1, and that was it. And he lived through all that, you know. And Celtic were awful until Jock Stein came along, you know. These are the glory days, man. These are days to be enjoyed. We still like a good argument and all that, but honestly, these days are happy days.
Living through their 9 in a row was absolutely horrendous.
Horrendous. That was the year I started work, was when they started their 1 in a row. And we're all Rangers supporters. I mean, absolutely, I could say that, you know, without fear of contradiction. To go through 9 in a row and through all that was unbelievable. But you know what?
I bet you wish you still worked there, mate.
I tell you, I did, even when I was there, the crack of going to a Celtic match during the 90s was brilliant.
Yeah.
It was a laugh.
Yeah. So, you know, that's what makes you stronger, right? As a support, I think, you know, not being spoiled all the time and giving a big petted lip because you can't sign a big name player and all that kind of stuff, you know.
It's not even signing a big name player, it's when you can't even see a friendly on the TV with your second team playing.
People going banzai about pre-season friendlies. God almighty.
Other fans used to always say, oh, what do you know what it's like following a team? You are always winning. The 90s, 3 trophies.
I know, that's right.
Aye, we're always winning. Exactly.
One of them, Ergie nearly equalised, if you remember that day, if it wasn't for that tackle by Peter Grant.
That was far from a foregone conclusion that day, let me tell you.
or far from a stylish performance either.
It was awful.
But I tell you, that was one of the ones that was celebrated big and large, because it had been that long since we...
But mind, we did the Airdrie team and Not the View, and it was Alex McDonald.
Yep.
Read out all his players.
They put it in the back page of the Daily Mail.
Aye.
We won that cup for Celtic.
Not the View won that one.
He put it up in the dressing room wall to motivate his players. He says, go out there and prove that you're not as bad as that. They actually quoted a line from it saying that Airdrie were a throwback to the days when two villages would get a severed head and kick it from one village to the other. And he stuck it up in the dressing room, well, according to the Daily Mail, still got the curtain in the house, and he said to his players, go out there and prove that you're no rubbish.
All they tried to do was kick a head, though, didn't they?
Very good. Right, lads, I'm going to wrap it up. Before I go, I want you to nominate a charity that's going to benefit from the 90s portion of the history podcasts.
Could we pick Rangers 11 against AC Milan?
I don't think you should broadcast that because they'll be in there trying to pull for the money. The old zombies.
God love them. It's funny the way things come back to haunt you, isn't it?
All right. Well, listen, could you, if anything comes of it, could you donate it to the Beatson, please?
The Beatson?
Aye.
Spell that for me.
It's Beatson. It's a cancer centre in Glasgow.
Absolutely. Love to. Average Joe Miller, JB Banal. It's been an absolute pleasure. Enjoyed that. And it was
anytime you're feeling good about yourself, just give us a phone and we'll relive the 90s again for you. We'll soon bring your mood back then.
You've done enough damage in one night. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Cheers.
No, it's very good. Talk to you soon.
See you, mate. Ta-ra.
Bye-bye.
Alright folks, there you go, that's the end of chapter 10. Sorry it took so long to get that one up, but well, you get 5 hours, so hopefully that'll make it up for you. Absolutely brilliant again. 4 years took 5 hours. Oh well, sure. I mean, there's nothing you could leave out, so it was absolutely brilliant. Special thanks to JB Banal and Average Joe Miller from Not The View, and Jason and Harper from the HomeBhoys. And what a different perspectives for the takeover. And I think we got that. Thanks this week goes to the Human Torpedo, Chris from the Paradise Report, Pat from Half the World Away podcast, Stuart from the CelticShirt.co.uk, the old pal Marty Flynn from the Belfast Celtic Society and from the Huddle Board, Stephen Monaghan, of course, our roving reporter. He gets you all the fan bites and all that kind of good stuff. And not forgetting, of course, Matt McGlone and Brian Dempsey. Absolutely brilliant tales of what is our history. Great also to have Anton, Paul Byrne, Tom Boyd and all those guys, and Charlie and the Boys and the Wakes for the music. So the lads from Not The View chose the Beatson as the charity that will benefit from the Celtic History podcast, and you can check them out at beatson.scot.nhs.uk, and you can read about the fantastic things they do there in the Cancer Centre. The donations are coming along all right, but we're still short of our target. And remember, this is all free. It's up to you to make a donation, but just to put things into perspective, we've done 25 hours of audio history so far. So if you want to throw a few quid into the pot, that would be brilliant, and all the money raised will go to the charities chosen by our special guests, of course. You can find a link on how you can make a donation through PayPal or by any major credit card on hailmedia.com. Just click on the Celtic History Podcasts page. So remember, it's not too late to send in any audio bites that you have. We will have 13 chapters in total. So although there's not much time to get them in, there is a little bit of time. Come on, let us know where you were when we stopped the 10. Let us know where you were when the Dream Team came to Celtic. All those sort of things. Tell us about some match you went to in the 60s, 70s, or the 80s, and the experiences that you had. It's all Celtic fan history, and that's what we're trying to do. And really, those little bits are just magic. So they are just magic. I've lost count of the number of people who've actually had the podcast now. I'll collect all that information and count it all up for the final chapter, but I'm sure we're well over 100 different people now, so that's superb. So the next edition of the Celtic History Podcast will cover the period 1994 to 2000, and I'm absolutely delighted to say that Scott McCrory from the Huddle Board, better known as Ruggy Vogue, will be joining me to discuss that, and it's gotta be good fun. So that period, of course, was brilliant as well, because you had the Coca-Cola Cup final. Okay, that wasn't so brilliant. The Scottish Cup final 1985, stopping the 10, Vim the Tim, the Dream Team, Tommy Burns, and that's shaping up very, very nicely. So that'll be out in a couple of weeks. They're sort of taking a wee bit longer at the minute, obviously because of the length of the podcast. I mean 5 hours is ridiculous that you had this time, but that takes a lot of editing and a lot of mixing. So there you go. Alright, playing us out as usual are your confessions. My name is Chris McGuigan, and you've been listening to the Celtic History Podcast. Talk to you in a couple of weeks. Cheers.
Funniest thing I've ever seen at a football game, we were up at Kilmarnock during the 90s. It was one of those games that Rangers had dropped points the day before. We were up to Rugby Park and drew enough for each. We were halfway up the Moffat stand, and in those days the Kilmarnock fans in the main stand were allowed to walk out onto the kind of track to get out the gate beside, and one Kilmarnock fan came right up to the Celtic end, arms outstretched, like, get up you, and as I say, we were halfway up the Moffat stand, but from behind us somebody launched an apple, and the apple caught the Kilmarnock fan square in the head, smashed into different pieces. The whole Celtic end, everyone that was still left was in pieces, laughing at the guy. It was just a great moment.
My name is Jerry McMahon, and when we stopped to 10 in a row, I was inside the stadium. I remember the day in particular because my best friend, Swansea boy, got us 2 brand new Celtic tops for the occasion. He got them from a corporate sponsor, and we made our way up to Celtic Park looking fantastic, and just had such a remarkable day. Tension at first, incredible, but Henrik's goal and ultimately Bratback's second just made it an incredible day. Finished off, as always, in the Gallagate, but unusually for me, I was determined to go home and see the highlights on BBC One, and I totally remember hearing Rob McLean describing that day, and the following day, reading it all and seeing it all again in Scotsport, and it just was such an amazing, fantastic weekend, and it sums up everything about what's good about Celtic. Amazing.
I was there when we stopped at 10. I was a 14-year-old boy. Got my face painted in a tricolor outside the ground. I remember the excitement and the nerves. King Henrik got the ball rolling. Harold Bratback finished it off. Then walking down the London Road after the game, everybody's going mad, waving flags and scarves and cars beeping their horns. It was the first time I remember us winning the league and realising we'd really done something special in stopping the 10. Great memories.